Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to be talking about Uranus turning retrograde in Gemini. So this is within the context of Uranus newly being in Gemini. So it went into Gemini for the summer of 2025, and then it went backward into Taurus. It finally permanently moved into Gemini on the 26th of April of this year, and it's going to be staying there pretty much until 2033. This is our first Uranus retrograde in Gemini that's going to stay within the sign of Gemini. So it should be experienced quite a bit differently than what we've experienced before, both of Uranus here, but also of that short stint of Uranus direct and retrograde in Gemini that we had last year. So I want to cover this to remind ourselves what Uranus is up to here, to kind of check in on it, how we can work with it, what this retrograde is likely to introduce to our experience of the transit. I have the dates here of the retrograde, which is going to run from the 10th of September of 2026 until the 8th of February of 2027. Now, the way that I want to cover this is we'll do a little bit of review. I'm using some of the old slides from when we just covered Uranus and Gemini, and then I've added in some slides about the retrograde. So we'll be looking directly at the notes from earlier this year. And I will also link to that video in the description box under related videos if you want to dive into it more, because here I'm basically just going to be doing a quick overview of Uranus and Gemini and then spending a little more time talking about the retrograde motion. Overall, though, Uranus is about liberation. It can be quite disruptive, quite inventive. It tends to point to breaking patterns, breaking points, breakthroughs, awakenings. It also has a lot to do with ideology, ideas, groups of people, alliances, networks. And so certainly we've seen quite a bit of shifts and changes along all of those lines. In Gemini, it tends to be very discursive, so it tends to work within the discourse, the conversations that are going on nationally, globally, with each other, our experience of connecting with each other, being very different, very unusual, even very unconventional with how we connect with each other with Uranus and Gemini, can also be very humorous, even in how it's disrupting things. It can be a little bit cheeky about that. I think we've seen that in the ability to laugh off some of the complications that we've run into in this year, especially globally, being able to relate with each other over it. The sense of feeling like we're living in this kind of alternate reality that's very strange, but we're all doing it together. It's also, again, very eccentric and brilliant and adaptive, especially of mind. So being able to figure things out, new solutions, innovative solutions. It also tends to be very rebellious in mind and action, politically, ideologically speaking. And it's very willing to take on the status quo directly, to challenge that, to attempt to find solutions to social issues, and to push back against forces that kind of seem to keep us stuck within a certain system that may not be really working as well as it has in the past, or may not be working at all. Additionally, and this is something that I think we have seen on a level and at a pace that I was not expecting, at the very least in the US, I kept harping on it's going to be progressive. It's going to be progressive. The Overton window had seemed to shift so far to the right in the US over the past couple of years. And I kept saying, wait it out, because the fact of that was that Uranus was in Taurus. And what I had seen when I had gone into the past was that there tends to be a lot of a far right ideology that makes a lot of strides while Uranus is in Taurus. And that's the time that we're coming out of. And yet what we also saw bear out in the history, whenever we're looking back over Uranus and Gemini, is that there is this massive shift or this correction to the Uranus and Taurus, which pulls it much farther to the left then. And we have seen this in a pretty big way this year with a lot of the primaries in the midterm election season that we've been seeing and experiencing. So I'm just going to say I called that, but it is actually it's faster than I was expecting for that to happen. It is also very liberty seeking, and one of the things that I've also been harping on is that if there are attempts to crack down on rights, if there are attempts to dismiss populations and their desires, if there is an attempt to maybe undermine democracy or the democratic order, that is also not going to go over well with Uranus and Gemini. It's going to wind up pushing back against that in a pretty strong way. So maybe that's something that we also, I think we've seen that to some extent, but we'll see if in the US in particular, again, with all these elections coming up, if there is some major pushback against that. So yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and look at this on a collective kind of energetic level. Again, this is just Uranus and Gemini, what we tend to be dealing with here. So a lot of the focus here, a lot of the energy that we're going to be dealing with is around matters of intelligence, matters of open-mindedness, curiosity. Critical thinking has also come up as a major topic over this past year with Uranus and Gemini due to all of the AI developments and people saying, oh, we need these critical faculties. We need to value critical faculties, and we need to value our ability to sort out problems on our own so that we don't become too dependent on, for instance, AI sorting things out for us. There's also a tendency toward renewal of education with Uranus in Gemini as well. Again, a lot of conversation about smartphones in schools, also AI. So again, I think we'll see this continue to develop. As I mentioned, humor and communication is very central to this. So we will see people creating memes a lot. We're going to see some very unique ways of demonstrating. But even in our day-to-day interactions, humor is going to go over well, and people should be more open to communication. Gemini also really exalts diversity. It wants to pull in all different kinds of ideas and perspectives and so forth. And so Uranus is going to spark that up and stir that up again, the value of diversification, the value of diversity of experience and of perspectives. Collaboration is going to be really big with this as well. We've seen this in several countries recently in terms of community collaboration and trying to solve problems, getting more involved in community, connecting with each other again, wanting to feel like you're part of something or that you're contributing to something, and recognizing the value of that as well. There is this kind of technological pragmatism that I was seeing with Uranus and Gemini, and I do think that we have recognized this, which is that as we were kind of coming into this alignment, there was this real big exaltation of artificial intelligence where there was all this fear that it was going to take everyone's jobs and it was going to displace humanity and all of this. And I kept looking at it as, yes, it's going to introduce this kind of AI-like disruption, but it's also going to be disruptive to AI, to the broligarchy, to big tech, right? And so we've seen that a lot, especially over the summer, now that we have Uranus permanently in this position, where all of that, the hype, the bubble around it may also wind up bursting at some point relatively soon, given the fact that Uranus is going to be switching directions in Gemini for the first time, once right after the other. So that may also be something that comes up with this retrograde, is pulling back on that bubble, but coming back to what is valuable technologically, what can it do and what can it not do. There's a real value of authentic expression with Uranus and Gemini as well. So being really honest about how you're feeling, how you're presenting yourself, worrying less about trends and fads and social expectations, being willing to just kind of do one's own thing, go one's own way. This also is very solution seeking. So trying to figure out how to solve problems, especially on a social level, with that being in Gemini, but even in our own personal lives, keeping an open mind around any issues or complications or slowdowns, delays, obstacles that we may run into. This is going to be really clever for figuring out solutions to almost anything. And yeah, finally, eccentric lifestyles as well. This could be a lot of people going nomadic or pursuing fields of work or lines of work that are outside of the norm, that are unconventional, ways of connecting with each other, ways of relating with each other in our communities that are going to be unique and are going to help to push things forward. are going to help to open our mind socially. So these may be eccentric lifestyles that are kind of coming online around this time, but this may become the norm in a couple of decades. So one thing I have seen quite a bit is nomadism. I've even seen a rise in like communal, intentional community creation as well, like people coming together and living in these unique ways together, even though they're not like moving around a bunch. I don't know exactly how to refer to that. Someone I'm sure can put a name for what that is in the comments. But yeah, also again, just liberation from constraint. So Uranus was pretty stuck when it was in Taurus for all those years. It didn't have as much wiggle room. It felt like it was quite claustrophobic there. It felt like we were in a kind of a holding pattern or trying to wade through mud, trying to come up with all these breakthroughs and solutions as the very material that we were working through was so thick and so unforgiving. But now we're dealing with a mutable air sign, and the change, the liberation is much easier to come by. So as this winds up turning retrograde on this collective energetic level, this is going to be about a lot of consolidation and internalization. You're going to hear me use those words a lot about this. So what are the changes that have been made? What are the different kinds of perspectives that we have created? What are the new kinds of communities that have come together? What are the renegotiated alliances that we have? The technological advancements that we've made in this year? The new ideologies, the new perspectives that have come online. This is about consolidating that. It's no longer about this is an experimental thing. It's about this is something that has come online and we're going to be working with this now. This is part of the material that we're working with. We may tweak it, we may change it going forward, but a lot of the push and pull, the new crazy news and the being up in the air, what are all of the options that are available? It feels like it could go in this or that or this or that direction. This is a little bit of pulling back from that kind of a sense. And it's more around shoring up the shifts and changes that have already happened. So all of that novelty is now internalized, it's crystallized. This is, again, it's the new material that we're working with. Now, this I think can be incredibly helpful because it might help us to understand a little bit better, not only of where we stand right now, but also of where we're going to stand with Uranus in Gemini. Because it was such a back and forth, it crossed into Taurus backward. We also had all the outer planets switching signs, etc. We're getting used to it now. I kept saying, like, when this first rushes in, we will have no idea what we're doing. And it's going to be a matter of learning the ropes of all this new energy. And it's probably going to feel initially, especially with this and such, all of these and active signs. Neptune also just changed signs this year. Pluto did so last year. And so we've been dealing with so much new, different kinds of energy that it feels like we don't know at all what's going on or what could be going on a week, 6 weeks, 6 months down the road. What's helpful about these retrograde cycles is that it will slow that roll a little bit, but it's also going to clarify, again, not just what are we dealing with next summer, but what are we going to be dealing with for several years. We should have a pretty solid glimpse of that and be able to internalize that so that we're actively engaging with what has become real at this point. Now, this may also require a bit of a course correction or a reversing course on some of the changes, some of those threads, or some of the, like, throwing the spaghetti at the wall, that which didn't stick. There's also a need to recognize that not everything that's tried is going to come with us. And it's during these retrograde periods that it should be made clear as to what has been real of what's new and what hasn't been, what has maybe been just a seed of an idea or just a kind of fantasy or just kind of far-flung wish casting or whatever it is. And this could be on a personal level, but it could also be on a social level. The fears, the what ifs, all of that. What if that isn't real? The retrograde is going to help us to step back from that and worry about that less. That's not coming with us, is what that retrograde is going to be saying. So clarification around what we're actually going to be dealing with going forward. Now, when it comes to all this new information that we've been working with, Probably we have felt more distractible this year than is typical because we have Uranus disrupting this area of the conscious mind. And so, especially when it comes to like information overload and stuff like this, the address impacts on nervous system, that's kind of overall. But I really mean this around all the new information, the distractibility, the feeling the need to check in on the news every half hour or whatever, or check in on friends every half hour or whatever to see like, is there something new, what has changed, trying to keep up with everything. It can have a real impact on the nervous system. So how has that impacted you this year? This is a good time to check in on that. Try and slow down. I would say slowing down, especially on the news consumption, is going to be great for a lot of people. Pulling back from that which stresses us out and de-emphasizing that to a great extent. The thing is, with Uranus and Gemini, a lot of complications and obstacles will wind up sorting themselves out because of how much help we now have with finding solutions and with flexibility and adaptability and so forth. So fretting so much about every little thing isn't really going to be that helpful anyway. So really reconsideration around all of this new information, the distractibility, the impacts that that has on us and how we have been flexible with that. And I would say kudos, big congratulations on the openness, the willingness to work with all this new stuff that's been thrown at us. But additionally, look at where maybe did that go a little bit too far, and where maybe should we draw up some firmer lines now that we know what that kind of information overload onslaught is going to feel like. We should be able to know at this point where to say no, where to shut that down, where to tune out, where to chill out, right? So that I think is also going to be very helpful with that going retrograde. The internalization of all of this and getting in touch with how all this information has impacted us on a psychological and emotional and also a physical level, I think is going to be very helpful and very important in this whole process. Additionally, Uranus is very inventive. And so that is often a word that goes along with it. Something that's very fun and shockingly useful to do about retrogrades is to take a lot of the words that are associated with a given planet and just throw re on the front of it. And often you're going to wind up getting into some of what that retrograde is going to wind up bringing up. And what I mean here by reinvention, it's really about looking at what has been innovated upon. What has the invention been this year? What's been new? What is the novelty here? This is about looking back over that, maybe even pulling back, like reversing course a little bit, and then do it a little bit differently, especially once we get to February and it starts moving direct again. We should have a clearer vision of how is it that we actually want to work with this energy? What is it that we actually want to invent for ourselves with this? Additionally, some of the insights that we have, for one thing, those are going to also turn more internal. So all this realization, the shock, the aha, the breakthrough moments that we have had in our conception of society and what's possible, all of this kind of novelty of, wow, I didn't think that we would be doing that for both good and for rough. A lot of that is going to be turned internally now with Uranus moving retrograde as well. So a lot of those insights, those aha moments, those breakthrough moments are going to be about ourselves, who we are, what we care about, what our priorities are. What do we believe in? What is our kind of ideology or our ideas? How does our mind function? Expect a lot of great, very, very, very valuable insights around all of that in the coming months as well with Uranus turning retrograde. And some of that, if you have had some kind of an invention or an innovation around yourself, expect to be looking at that from a different perspective. And maybe you're going to drop some of that. Maybe you're going to tweak some of it. Maybe you're going to change some of what you have newly taken on or some new way of presenting yourself, or some, again, new priorities that you've had. This is a great point to check in on that. See what's working, see what's not. Feel free to discard what's not. Uranus and Gemini is never, ever going to judge us for being flaky. It's actually going to be very rewarding to us to be flexible and to be open-minded and to be willing to make pivots and things like that. So it's very different from Uranus and Taurus, like we've been dealing with for years. So overall, what of our new perspectives have been useful? That's probably, I would assume, what we want to take with us. But if we can take note of that and then be willing to at least cut the mental or cognitive ties with what hasn't been so fruitful. So what of the new ideas don't really work? Don't worry about them anymore. Free up some mental energy for when we start to move forward again. So here's one of the old slides, just kind of going through what we see with Uranus and Gemini in history. I have some of the dates here. What we see through these periods of time in the US, it's so easy to remember and it's so straightforward. It's the American Revolution, the Civil War, and then World War II, the US's involvement in World War II, and then the post-war period as well, when a lot of those institutions, the international institutions, the Bretton Woods system, and so forth was coming together. But these are those sets of years. And what we tend to see is a lot around emancipation, around civil rights, around liberties. Again, rebellion and conflict is really the name of the game here. This, of course, look at the 40s here. This is really when the tide started to turn big time politically. We also, of course, saw that just post the antebellum South with the Civil War and then with Reconstruction and everything. And then, of course, we had a lot of crackdowns and so forth. Just prior to the American Revolution, we also had a pretty rigid system going on in France. And this was a period of time when there were a lot of the original Enlightenment ideas were not only going around and being passed around and being spoken of and rights and all of this, but there was action that was being taken to that end. So this kind of wound up spurring on that major, like, liberal revolutionary spirit of the late 18th century. So yeah, we also, of course, see a lot of schism and unification. So splitting apart of different alliances and groups, but also of different nations, and also then coming together in new forms as well. A lot of progress. These are some of our most major, I would say this is probably our three most major periods of time of major breakthroughs, other than maybe the 1960s, which is interesting because the 1960s are viewed here with Jupiter in Leo and Saturn in Aries. That happened in 67. And so we also have a little bit of that flavor coming back again around this year. So yeah, major, like, progressive, very political period of time we're clearly in. Communications development seemed to come through quite a bit during all these different times. So we can expect more of that, certainly. A lot of nuclear developments, of course, wound up occurring during the 1940s. And unfortunately, we were expecting for that to become a major issue again. And it certainly has. Now, on the weapons side, but also on the energy production side, that has definitely been discussed quite a bit, especially given the complication of the energy situation right now. Increased pace as well. So I don't think any of us would argue with that this year has been quite a bit crazier than a lot of years prior. And even the summer of 2025 was really spurred by that little short stint that we got of Uranus just hopping into Gemini and then moving right back. So here I have some of what we can expect on a global level, a geopolitical level, with Uranus turning retrograde as well. So a lot of renewal of disruptions and consolidation around this new normal that I've been mentioning, around media, communications, transit, trade, shipping, technologies, big tech, generally speaking. So what I'm saying here is what we have in terms of the dividing lines and so forth, we're likely to be working with that and renewing this. Now, we may be going back over some of this. So we may be dealing with some of those same disruptions, the same conflicts, the same issues of alliances, the same disagreements within alliances, the same fissures within alliances, the same discussions around maybe shifting or changing some of these alliances that have already been going on. So it is what we're dealing with right now is that new normal. It's not going to so much be, oh, we could fly off in any direction. It's that we're expecting to go back over and look at again and possibly renew and possibly address and look at a little bit differently some of those dividing lines and issues that have arisen, the disruptions that have arisen around all those areas that I've mentioned. Directional shifts and conflicts as well. So what I want to say as well about this Uranus, specifically around the conflict with Iran, is that we had a solar eclipse in Aquarius, and it was at a pretty sharp square to Uranus before it moved into Gemini for good. So it was still just in Taurus. And what a couple of us astrologers were saying was, okay, and then Mars is right on the heels of that. And then we're going to have that sharp Mars-Uranus square just several days later. And probably there's going to be a conflict with Iran at that point. And that unfortunately wound up being the case. So we do need to look at this Uranus as somehow involved in that conflict. And we did also see this in the previous year as well, when we were getting hard aspects from Mars. Now, one thing that I am sad to have to point out here is that we will get this square coming up in a pretty important season between Mars and Uranus. So we could see that conflict spark up again at some point, perhaps toward the end of this retrograde, maybe when it's stationing to go retrograde in September as well. But what I have here is a snapshot that is just after the solar eclipse that's going to be in Aquarius, but it's also just before the lunar eclipse. And that lunar eclipse is going to be with Mars at a really sharp angle here to in a square to that Uranus. So again, toward the end of this, which is what I'm showing here, this is February, I wouldn't be surprised to see a major directional shift in that conflict in particular, but there could be new especially when we have that eclipse coming up and then Uranus is about to turn direct again, a new page or a new chapter that's involved with that as well, I think is something I'm a little bit worried about when I look at the astrology of February coming up. But that's a little bit down the road here. In the meantime as well, again, major reinventions around society. What does society mean? What are we aiming at collectively together? What is our vision for how we live globally with each other? How is it that we organize ourselves? How is it that we run our governments, that we run our companies? How is it that our societies function? That is going to be reinvented during this period of time. There has been a lot of innovations around that, for better and worse, in this past year. So this is going to be about renegotiating that, looking back over that. As I mentioned, progressive ideologies are always going to wind up coming up with Uranus and Gemini. This could be a consolidation around that as well, pulling in and then sorting out some of the internal issues along the progressive lines. Additionally, I do want to point out that there's something quite interesting about groups and social causes that could wind up firming up, addressing those internal divisions before pressing upon society again next year. So the lines are going to be drawn around different ideologies, but they're also then likely to be shored up. So it should be clearer through this process as to who is with whom, where are those lines, where are those alliances, and how are people working together. Again, a lot of this is likely to skew progressive, though, in this coming year. Finally, we are likely to see a lot of reactions to any sort of disruptions around rights and liberties during this period of time as well. A lot of rebellion and unrest around what has been pulled back or what has been repealed in terms of rights. Maybe some of this does have to do with democracy or the democratic will. I think, for instance, I hate to keep bringing this back to the US, but I'm pretty sure that in both Missouri and Texas, there have been referendums recently where the population voted for something specific, and then the government wound up repealing it. And I think there's some frustration there. For instance, that could be the kind of thing that would really provide a spark for communities in those states to organize around, as an example. And schisms, reunification, especially along ideological lines, but also along geopolitical lines. So all of the international alliances and military agreements and financial and economic agreements and trade agreements and things like this, those are likely to be pulled back to the drawing board around this time. And there may be some splits, and there may be the ability to renegotiate some of that around this time, and consolidation around some new values as well. So I want to also just leave in these slides and just also kind of point out probably some of the nations. I went into this deeper in the other video that you can click on, but these are some of the countries that are most likely to be very strongly impacted by this Uranus in Gemini, and every time that it shifts direction and so forth, because of the fact that Uranus in Gemini figures in strongly to their natal charts as nations. And here are some of the institutions as well. So this is part of the reason why I've been talking about this on the membership side a lot. We've been really looking at the impact that all of this has had, this Uranus and Gemini and the disruptions that has had on the UN and its functioning, on the ICC, on the ICJ as well, and on all of these other UN institutions that came together during that post-war period. We also, of course, have NATO has been under a lot of stress. The Bretton Woods system is fascinating because I kept stressing that there was going to be issues with regard to currency that were coming up. And I did not really expect, again, for this to happen so quickly, where it's being openly discussed as to the value of currencies, exchange rates, reserve currencies, bond yields, etc. So, but this is very much to be expected based on these institutions that have come together, as well as on the U.S. central banking also is figuring in quite strongly to these returns. But again, you can dig into that a little bit more in the other video if you're interested in that. So ultimately, this is going to be a lot about internalization, consolidation around some of our flexibility, taking heed of that, considering the impact of all of that on us, on our nervous systems. Have we been doing a lot of novelty seeking? Now would be the time to, again, figure out which of those threads are going to come with us and which aren't. We can do more novelty seeking when Uranus goes direct again in February. But now is the time to figure out what's right for us and what's not, what's real for us and what's not. To internalize that novelty and really make it our own and allow for that to be our springboard as we're going forward next year as well. This is going to help us a lot with developing insights, learning about ourselves, our own preferences, our genuine interests as well. It's going to help us to keep our minds even more open, to be willing to change our minds, to be willing to quote unquote flake out about things and change course or pivot, changing how we think about information, how we gather information, possibly even not believing in certain things or ways anymore. We're also likely to find that there's a lot of intuition or intuitive hits that seem to come out of nowhere with Uranus in retrograde. Especially claircognizance is likely to be especially heightened by this. But we're also then likely to run into the kind of unpredictability of our own minds and when that's working and when it's not. And also when is it an intuitive hit and when is it a little bit of restlessness that this Uranus and Gemini can also bring in. So additionally, Uranus retrograde, it's not so much about needing to take action on anything right now. It's more about trying to figure out what has become outdated and then deciding what's going to come with us into the next phase, into the next year. But yeah, I hope that was all helpful. I hope that it helps with understanding some of the little shifts in dynamic that we're going to be experiencing with Uranus in the coming months. There's going to be timestamps for all of the different horoscopes. Those are going to be best for your sun and your rising sign. And if you do like this video, I would really greatly appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up or a hype. That helps the channel out so much. And consider subscribing for future videos. We tend to dig into major alignments like this, major transits, looking at it from a collective energetic level, on a global level, taking it through sign by sign. So if that is something that you're into, definitely consider sticking around. There's also information in the description box and the pinned comment about personal bookings, as well as membership perks, including weekly forecasts, discounts on readings, free reading drawings, monthly courses, So if that is something that you're interested in, I would love to see you on that side as well. And thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. It really means the world to me. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have Uranus in your third house, and it's been moving into this area since about 2025, off and on. So it's been, as it's retrograded, it has been moving back into Taurus recently. This time it's going to stay in Gemini, it's going to stay in your third house. So this is the place of your sense of connection, community, communication, exchange with other people. This is the place of your mind, your mental state, how you think about things, how you perceive of things, how you process information. It also has a lot to do with writing, teaching, learning. So, as it's been in this area, likely over the past year or so, you have been thinking about this differently or encountering new ideas, new energies, maybe new connections on a community or communication kind of a level. Maybe you've been thinking about things differently, or you've had fresh perspective on different areas of life, perhaps especially to do with other people, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with that, just kind of everyday life. A lot of novelty being introduced. Now, it could have been somewhat destabilizing at times. It may have been a little bit unpredictable at times, but now we're getting to a pretty important phase of this overall transit, which is the first time that it's stationing to go retrograde, where it's going to stay in this area. So all of that forging ahead that you've done into uncharted territory here, the fresh ideas, the fresh conversations, fresh connections, this is going to be a period of time where you're consolidating some of this. So you're really reaping a lot of the progress that you've made. Now, this could have to do with culling some of what's new. So our first major check-in point, okay, there's all this new stuff going on, all these new connections. Which of these are actually significant to me? Which of them feel really comfortable? Which of them feel like they're going to support a sense of growth and liberation and freedom for me as an individual to express myself the way that I want to going forward? So you could find yourself reversing course along some of these lines. Now, it may feel somewhat strange because probably a lot of what you are thinking deeply about and maybe even reevaluating is probably still pretty new. But this is a great period of time to really check in on what's new and see, do you want to stick with it or not? It's totally fine to drop some ways of thinking about things, some opinions, maybe even about new people that you've been dealing with. Sometimes when things are new, I feel like we can get a sense of imposter syndrome or feeling like reversing course is going to make us look flaky. This is a period of time where you're encouraged to make some pretty big changes. So I'll give you a few examples when it comes to this. Again, some of this is going to have to do with how you communicate, your voice, your views, how you converse with people. So let's say that as Uranus has been moving its way into this area since last year, that you've been really trying to hold space for others and trying really hard maybe not to interrupt, or trying really hard to make the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis feel very comfortable. And that's wonderful. But maybe you have felt like, okay, this has taken up quite a bit of time. It doesn't really feel like me. I feel like I'm getting interrupted, but I'm not trying to interrupt. Maybe you feel like that same space isn't being held for you. And it can, like I said, be wonderful to try to be very mindful about how you're connecting with people. But if that has you focused very strongly in a conversation on what's going on with the other person, maybe you feel like that's tripping you up in terms of your own thought processes and really considering what is it that they're saying and what is it that you are feeling about that. So this could be kind of reversing course on that to an extent. It doesn't mean that you need to completely give that up. You've probably had a lot of very interesting insights that have developed there, but now it's time to kind of check in again, reinvent again, recalibrate again when it comes to how you're connecting with people. This can also have a lot to do with learning, teaching. So how do you share your ideas? Who are you getting ideas from as well? Who have you been listening to recently? Do you still feel like you're getting as much out of their ideas or their ways of going about things or their expertise as you have before? Just because something was a really wonderful breath of fresh air, maybe just because something has really introduced new perspectives and yeah, new perspectives to you, doesn't mean that it needs to stick with you forever. So again, yes, from the outside, this may look a little bit flaky. Sometimes I feel like we can judge ourselves about that a bit, and we can really try and stick with something and see something through. But when we're dealing with Uranus, we don't have to do that. We can flake out on things, and we can actually benefit quite a bit from being really radically honest with ourselves about what is it that we're getting out of things. Do we feel really liberated? Do we feel like we have enough of an experience of novelty to keep us interested, to keep us stimulated in this area? So another quick example here, we could see you connecting with maybe like post COVID, maybe you felt like you disconnected from your community quite a bit. And maybe that's been something that you've been working on over the past year or so, is like connecting with people, connecting with your local community again, or at least like connecting with people online and sharing your ideas and so forth. And maybe this could be that you've branched out quite a lot, and maybe it's become somewhat destabilizing because maybe there are too many different irons in the fire. Maybe there's too much going on at this point. And it doesn't mean that you need to completely withdraw from all of them, but maybe there needs to be a different kind of a prioritization here. And I wouldn't be shy to really think about which of those connections, which of those communities that you've connected with are genuinely exciting to you. Choosing based on that is going to help us a lot with Uranus, because if we are rejecting our right, our prerogative to stay fascinated, to stay interested in life, to stay fresh and not feeling like we're in a rut, it usually starts to disrupt things on its own if we try to ignore that or sweep that under the rug. And that's where things can get a little uncomfortable. So always leaning into the flexibility, the joy, the excitement, that's usually the way to go. And you're going to want to do this when it comes to what's going on in your mind. What are you thinking about? What are you talking about? Who are you connecting with? Now, another thing that may have come up for you is sometimes a sense of quite extreme overstimulation mentally, or feeling like you aren't quite as able to focus on things. Now, again, we're dealing with a fresh energy, and it can take some time to learn the ropes of a new long-term outer planet transit going through a specific house. So this could feel like there's a bunch of new stimulation that you're dealing with, and you may have felt like you don't really know where to draw the lines or when it's becoming too much. But hopefully you've learned the ropes a little bit, and this retrograde can help you, again, to consolidate, to maybe limit what your attention is going toward and focus more so on the things that are fun. So for instance, this can also have to do with media. One of the things you may have encountered recently is dealing maybe with news media in a different kind of a way. So there's a lot of weird, rough news in the world. I don't think that that's any sort of controversial thing to say, but maybe it's a bit of a downer. Maybe it's a bit of a drag. And maybe if you have branched out into some new media connections or things like that, maybe you used to follow like one or two or three sources, and now you're following like seven. And it may feel just very overwhelming. Yes, you may be very informed on what's going on, but maybe it's time to kind of pull back from some of those that cause you to feel a greater sense of fight or flight, or cause you to feel a sense of restriction or even claustrophobia about what's going on in the world. And I again wouldn't feel guilty about doing that. This transit is ultimately about liberating your mind and giving yourself the freedom to focus on what's genuinely enjoyable to you. So again, that doesn't mean that you don't need to be informed at all. Maybe this is whittling it down to another one or two, and maybe it is or isn't what you originally came into this with. So there's still a lot of benefit from having kind of scattered your attention, but now it's time to kind of reel it back in and again, reprioritize what you're focusing on. What's interesting too is that, again, there's probably been a lot of different new ideas and things like that that you've been working with, but This is setting us up for the next, like, forging forward into new territory that we tend to experience in phases when Uranus is moving direct. So, around, I would say, especially this station point, so right around September of 2026. And I apologize, I'm going to try and mention the dates directly in all of the different signs horoscopes. It's going to be retrograde from the 10th of September of 2026 to the 8th of February of 2027. So that's a lot of what we're focusing on here. But say once we get to February of 2027, that's that new chapter. That's that forging ahead into uncharted territory again. But there may be a seed of an idea that you're toying with internally, that you're just kind of playing with and looking at. One of the things with retrogrades is that we don't necessarily need to act upon them right away, but we can let some new ideas percolate for some time. And that can help us to really know where we stand with things as we push forward again, starting next February there. But yeah, I think that that is a lot of what I have for you, Aries. I hope that this has resonated. It should feel like this is already a bit of an energy that you're working with, but it's just a different phase of it that you're coming into from this September until next February. So yeah, I hope it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Taurus, we have Uranus in Gemini turning retrograde in your second house. So this is the place of your personal resources. This can be very literal and very material in the sense of the things you own, your income, your assets, your accounts. But it also has a lot to do with what you bring to the table. So your personal resources, as in your attitude, your approach to things, your skill set, what makes you unique. Additionally, it has to do with your values. So, what is it that you care about? What is it that you prioritize? What is it that you want to bring in? What do you want to what do you want to grow in your life? What do you want more of? What do you want to pull in and have become a personal resource? So, as I mentioned, Uranus is stationing. That's going to station on the 10th of September of 2026, and it's going to be moving in retrograde motion until the 8th of February of 2027. And then it's going to start moving forward in the sign again. Now, this is part of the broader Uranus and Gemini transit that has been working its way into this area of your life since about last year. So it's likely that those different things that I just mentioned related to your second house, that there has been some shakeups, a little bit of unpredictability, some new insight, some novelty. But this is a major check-in point here. So this is the first time that this Uranus, as it turns retrograde in Gemini, isn't going to be then leaving the sign and going somewhere else. So it's very much speaking to your second house here. And it gives you this moment of being able to consolidate on what has been novel. So, especially when it comes to anything that's been introduced or anything that is new since last year along these lines in your life, incomes, maybe the account levels, maybe the numbers specifically that you're dealing with or the things that you own. If there's something major that you have bought recently or sold, even insights and novelty and changing your mind about what you value, what you want. This may be something that you've been kind of working with over the past year. And I think that sometimes we can get a sense of imposter syndrome or a sense of not wanting to be too flaky if early on in the process of something new that's been introduced to our life, again, maybe an attitude that you have about your material life and what that means to you and what you really value, etc. This is about checking in. This is about consolidating on that and maybe even reversing course on some new ideas that you've had. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to totally go back to the drawing board on this. Probably a lot of what has been introduced to you or the insights that you've developed over the past year are going to serve you really well going forward. But it may just be that you've branched out in a lot of different directions. Now it's time to kind of whittle that down and recalibrate and reprioritize what is actually going to give you a sense of financial freedom on a material level or a greater sense of freedom to pursue what is really important to you and what you want to grow more of in your life, or consolidating on certain skills that you've been developing. Maybe again, you have branched in a few different directions, knowing that different kinds of skill sets are going to be very valuable to you going forward. Maybe you can increase your income by developing certain things. And now maybe this is about, okay, I have learned these things and now it's just a matter of internalizing those lessons. Or it's even, oh, you know what? This isn't really improving my income to the extent that I thought it was. So I'm going to cut it off at this point and not necessarily worry about, oh, is this too soon to shut something down? If it doesn't feel right, there's a lot of permission here to break a pattern or to kind of cut ties with certain things when Uranus stations to go retrograde. So I wouldn't be shy about, again, looking flaky or looking like you're making too many changes. This is one of those periods of time where you should be checking in and changing some things up. Maybe, again, reversing course or cutting ties with certain things or certain approaches. So a lot of re-envisioning yet again along these lines. What's really important to you going forward? What kind of income are you after? How do you want to be earning it? Because another thing that I think we tend to lose sight of when it comes to the second house, it's not just about maximizing income. It is, especially when Uranus is involved here, also about weighing up some of the sacrifices that we can make when we are trying to maximize our income. So sometimes we can be in a position to where we can bring in a lot in a very otherwise intolerable rut-filled situation that we're not comfortable with and that doesn't make us feel free. And sometimes I think we can make a lot of excuses about, oh, well, I'll be free when I retire or in 5 years when I save up a certain amount, etc. But that can get kicked down the road for the long haul often. Now, with Uranus in this house, I will say it's unlikely that you will necessarily be able to, quote unquote, get away with overlooking these things or not being really radically honest with yourself about whether something's working for you or whether it's really functional, and just pouring your time, your effort, your energy into something that you're not really wanting. Often what Uranus will do, and this is where it gets kind of its bad reputation, is when we as human beings want to not deal with something, sometimes it can force the issue. And so, for instance, let's say, I'll give you like a rough example, something that we usually hate to see come up, but I think a lot of us are familiar with, is an income stream, a job that we don't like, that it's paying the bills, it's helping us to save, and so we stick with it, even though we have very little vacation time, we don't feel free, we feel like our ideas aren't really valued, etc. And sometimes what Uranus can do, again, this is kind of worst case scenario if we're really in denial about it, is it can take that job away even, you know? So that's why I always recommend, especially when Uranus is in these material houses like the 2nd or the 6th or the 10th, is to really not ignore, do you have any level of satisfaction with how you are earning your money? And is there something that you can do to improve upon that before Uranus takes matters into its own hands? So sometimes that can just look like putting your feelers out there. Is there something better? Is there a better source of income? Sometimes, especially with Uranus here, this can look like, do you want to start your own business? Do you want to go independent? Uranus is great at going independent with things. In Gemini, it could potentially maintain a specific income stream while splitting off and pursuing something different and allowing for that to develop and percolate and keep you more excited, more optimistic about your future while you still have a specific other kind of a job that may be less than satisfactory. So I wouldn't be shy about looking at your options, considering them. Now, Uranus retrograde, you may not need to act on this immediately, but I would really be thinking about it, re-envisioning, reinventing how you are approaching your income or what you own. This could even look like reevaluating some of your investments. If, for instance, you don't have like a job income stream, maybe this could look like investing a little bit differently if you're wanting higher returns or if you're wanting more steady returns. Maybe this could look like trying to make yourself more liquid to give yourself more freedom. So this could be maybe selling some property or selling some things that you own. And that could do double duty of giving your sense a greater sense of liberation from having too many things that you own to worry about. So the whole like Marie Kondo, does this bring you joy kind of a thing, and freeing up space, like minimalizing a little bit here. And then also freeing you up by creating more cash flow, right? From maybe selling some things or getting rid of some things. That really wouldn't surprise me because also with retrogrades, it can help us to reap some benefit from what we have already developed. This could even be a moment of either learning about or understanding some kind of a windfall that could be coming in as well. And that could also give you a greater sense of freedom. Maybe this is some seed money around a business idea that will help you to be more independent. Maybe it's a backer for the financial investment into developing certain skills that, again, are going to give you more options to pursue something that you enjoy more going forward. But yeah, overall, what this is going to be bringing up is that our material lives aren't just about what are the numbers. It's not just about what we own. It is about what freedom does that give us. That's why having money feels great, right? Is because it gives you a greater sense of freedom. So reevaluating, reinventing, renegotiating, having a sense of a reawakening internally about your relationship with material things, with possessions, with income, such that you're focused very strongly on what is the benefit of this to you? How does this give you flexibility? How does this open up options for you? Looking at those options and not just feeling like either, for instance, oh, going independent is a pipe dream. I would not be looking at things that way with Uranus here. Shocking breakthroughs can wind up occurring. So I wouldn't say that things are outside of the realm of possibility for you when it comes to your material life or financial freedom. Being really flexible as well about maybe what you are spending on or how you're bringing in money, that is also going to be great. Again, like I said, sometimes Gemini can introduce two different income streams, and that may be a lifelong thing for you, like a pattern that comes up for you because that's your second house. Uranus, though, is really activating and stimulating that. So this could be that time in your life where you do develop a second stream of income. Now, finally, I do want to put a word here about your sense of value, your sense of self-worth, and what you value. You're likely to see some shifts, changes, again, needing to liberate internally, needing to embrace what makes you really unique, what makes you authentic, nurturing that, prioritizing that. Even if it feels a little scary at times, even if you feel a little bit insecure about who you truly are, Uranus is definitely going to reward being open and honest and flexible with yourself and being really authentic with yourself and others, and especially with what you're bringing to the table. So what is it that you're introducing to the world that should be genuinely you? And really embracing that is going to help with a lot of the breakthroughs that, again, over the years, Uranus is going to be bringing into this area. So as I mentioned, this is the first retrograde that we're getting with it staying in the sign, but now it's going to be getting into a pattern of doing that where each time it goes retrograde all the way out until 2033, it's going to stay within this area of Gemini. So there's going to be so much uncharted territory to explore here. But this period of time between September and February, when it's retrograde, it's really about consolidating that uncharted territory that you've already explored so that you're in a solid sense of who you are, what you value, what your priorities are, so that you can enable things to come in, so that you can explore and push yourself more outside of comfort zones, outside of just prioritizing security and stability and things like that as you go forward. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you for now, Taurus. I did go into kind of an overview in a different video about Uranus in Gemini and what it's going to mean overall for us from like 2025 to 2033. So I will link to that in the description under related videos if you want to dive into it a little bit more. I covered most of the main points here though. So yeah, other than that, I just hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have Uranus and Gemini stationing to turn retrograde in your first house. This is the place of you, yourself, how you approach the world, your personal goals, the roles that you play, your sense of self. So, this is really where you show up fundamentally in your own chart. And on the 10th of September of 2026, this Uranus stations to turn retrograde, and it'll stay in retrograde motion until the 8th of February of 2027, when it will turn direct and then eventually wind up pushing more and more into Gemini. This is also taking place within the broader context of the Uranus and Gemini transit that's from about 2025 to about 2033. And this is our first time that Uranus will be turning retrograde and staying in Gemini the whole time. So, this is a pretty big checkpoint for you. This is really about looking at over the past year, say since 2025, it's very likely that you have been taking on new versions of yourself, maybe some new goals or a new way of approaching things. This could have introduced to you a lot of insights about who you are authentically and how best to present that, how best to really own that, to embrace that. So, this would basically wind up resulting in it looking like a lot of your goals, your interests, your personal direction changing. And again, it's likely that that has been occurring since about last year in different phases. But what we have coming up now as Uranus is turning retrograde is really consolidating a lot of that. So, reconsidering who is it that you're becoming? That's the big question that Uranus and Gemini is introducing to you. Who do you want to be? How do you want to be? And when it comes down to it, who do you really feel that you are? And so overall, again, this is a lot about personal reinvention, but now it's about checking in on that. Probably there's a lot of new threads that you followed, and maybe not all of them really feel right. Maybe some of them seemed fun or seemed like an experiment worth playing with for some time, and absolutely they would have been. Uranus is really going to be rewarding a willingness to experiment with who you are and how you approach things and goals and things like this. But now we're consolidating. So, what's working? What's not? You may find that you are reversing course on some of the changes that you've made, and that's totally fine. And that doesn't mean that you need to go back to an old version of yourself at all. This is really about a second phase of an internal reawakening about who you are. So maybe you have laid out a new course and you've started to follow it, but you may find that it's feeling too restrictive. Maybe you're feeling like, actually, I'm not really being authentic on this new path. Maybe it just feels a little off, but it took being willing to experiment with it, to learn that, to understand that, and that is totally fine. Being really radically honest with yourself, though, about who you are, who you're becoming, and the changes that you're wanting to make along all of those lines is always going to serve you well as long as Uranus is in your first house. But what's really special about this, for one thing, right around the station point is a really excellent time to break any sort of patterns that you have, embrace perhaps some new disruptions and really pay attention to those and any sort of insights that you're getting around messages or urges or even frustrations that wind up coming up. If you feel irritable about something that you have taken on, maybe you want to pivot around that. Maybe you want to recalibrate. Maybe you want to deprioritize some new goals that you've taken on or some new roles or some new ways of being. What this is it's a setup for when Uranus winds up turning direct again in February. By that point, there's going to be a whole new phase of forging ahead into uncharted territory when it comes to who you are and what you're approaching, what you are after. So in the interim, while this is retrograde, internalizing the changes that have been made. Don't think of these as, oh, this is necessarily something I'm playing with. Decipher what you're just playing with and experimenting with and that you're going to set aside, and then feel free to set those aside. But the things that really feel authentic to you, the things that feel like they are giving you a sense of liberation in how you're able to express yourself, what you really care about, what feels really right for you, consolidating that and crystallizing that, bringing that deeper into your sense of identity going forward, so that all of those little annoying things that can come up when it comes to novelty of like, am I being flaky if I make changes, or any sort of imposter syndrome that may come up here and there, so that you are on a more solid ground with these new changes that are being made by the time you get to that new phase of pushing forward even more and more and more. So internalize the changes that you've made up until this point, so that you're able to make greater changes and bring in more new versions of yourself, more new goals, greater authenticity during the Uranus direct period of time that you'll be experiencing for most of 2027. So as I alluded to, right around these station points, so that's when, so Uranus has been moving forward. It basically appears in the sky as though it stops and then starts to retrograde, and then it'll look like it's stopping, and then it'll go direct. It's in those points where it looks like it's stopping. There does tend to be a bit of shakeup in that moment, an added dose of unpredictability. The urges, the sense of the pressure itself of the transit can seem louder during those periods of time. So you may feel a little bit more erratic around September 10th. You may feel extra anxious. You may feel like you are overthinking things a lot, and that's all totally fine. I would pay attention to when that's coming up. It's likely that that will introduce to you some insights about what you're not really loving that may be new to you. May even be old versions of yourself. It may not be new. It may even be that there is some old seed of who you are that's trying to burst back onto the scene with this turning retrograde, that's kind of laying dormant and, again, trying to break through. And that can even be creating some of those feelings of internal restlessness, or almost like you are trying to hold something in. So I would really pay attention to where those urges are, because for you, this is going to be so personal, and it's going to be so like on your sleeve. It's also very likely to have a very direct impact on how you're behaving and how you're feeling about things. But try and give yourself that permission. Uranus itself tends to grant a lot of permission. You're allowed to experiment. You're allowed to make changes. That doesn't make you flaky. If you are trying to sort out what is authentic in me, what's not, what's offering a good return on investment in terms of what I'm putting my energy into and what's not, what's genuinely interesting you, not just what do you feel is responsible or what do you feel like you ought to be into. What do you genuinely love? What do you genuinely want to create more of in your life? What do you genuinely want to pursue? What really lights you up? What gives you that spark? What makes you feel lighter? What excites you? Being as honest as you can with yourself about that, 100%, that's going to be the way to go. If it means you're reversing course, so be it. If it means you look a little flaky, so be it. If it means that you are consolidating some aspects of self that maybe you didn't really envision before this past year, and you may feel like you are on that kind of shaky, uncharted territory, paving new paths, kind of an energy wave, basically, leaning into that as much as possible if it feels right for you. This retrograde is going to help you to internalize that, consolidate that, make that more real so that you don't feel out of sorts or, again, like an imposter or anything like that. So I have some questions here that I think are going to be maybe important to kind of meditate on over the coming few months here until February. Are you truly being yourself? It's okay if you're not, but being honest with yourself about that, trying to figure out how to get closer to that is always going to be helpful. And what new aspects of yourself, maybe even what old aspects of yourself, that's fine too, but what new aspects of yourself are going to come with you next year? There may be some new anxieties. There may be some new restlessness. There may be some new overthinking. There may be some new patterns of behavior or thought that have cropped up in the past year. Maybe you're not quite sure why, and that's totally fine as well. But Uranus can create a little bit of that restlessness, and you may have been internalizing that. So if you're able to kind of go within, look at that, maybe try and find the root of that, but at the very least, intentionally kind of set your mind to, this doesn't have to be part of me and it's not making me feel free or liberated, so I'd like to get rid of it. I would also kind of lean into that. What state do you want to be in when it comes to how you feel about yourself by the time this Uranus starts to forge ahead into new territory again next year? As long as you have these questions pretty decently answered, you're going to be set up really well for even greater changes and even greater liberation to come. It's going to come in these waves. It's going to feel like, okay, we're pulling on layers, we're taking off layers in these phases over the coming years. And this is a pretty important moment in that. So yeah, really reaping the benefits of having been willing to take some new paths, having been willing to go outside of a comfort zone, to experiment with who you are, with what you love, consolidating that so you can forge ahead into new uncharted territory next year as well. Yeah, I think that is a lot of what I have for you, Gemini. It's such a personal and unique transit for you. I did just cover as well in a recent video, kind of on a broader level, just Uranus and Gemini as a transit in and of itself in your first house. So, like, what to expect from it from 2025 to 2033. So if you want to go into that a little bit further, you can check that out. That'll be in the description under related links. I've hit a lot of the highlights here, though, so you definitely don't have to. And other than that, I just hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Uranus and Gemini stationing to turn retrograde in your 12th house. This is the place of your subconscious. It is the place of things that are kind of out of sight, sometimes out of mind, and sometimes out of our own direct control. It's also a place of beliefs, habits, patterns. It's a place where we function on our own, so in solitude or like away from others. The things that we do behind the scenes, projects that we're working on quietly, the things that we don't necessarily share with others. So this is going to be shaking that up quite a bit for years to come, but this is a really important phase in that process. So, as I mentioned, this is stationing to turn retrograde on the 10th of September of 2026, and it's going to be moving retrograde until the 8th of February of 2027. And what Uranus tends to bring to the table is a sense of liberation, novelty, a little bit of unpredictability, insights, aha moments, breakthroughs, things like this. And you may have felt like you've already been experiencing a lot of these in your inner world, in your subconscious, these insights into your own functioning, even those aspects of yourself that are somewhat outside of your control. So, when it comes to any sort of conditioning or your kind of knee jerk reaction, perspective, perception of things, how you feel about things internally, you may have been feeling like there's been these interesting insights or that you've been able to see some of this a little bit more clearly. And maybe you've even been able to make some changes along those lines because of this coming into your awareness. Maybe there's even been an increased interest in psychology or in spiritual practices that are meant to work with the shadow or the higher self, guides, guardian angels, things like that. There may have been a lot of these insights into either support systems that you have beyond the veil. This is also a place that connects with, like, beyond the veil, the energies that are supportive usually of us. And you may have felt more and more and more connected to that, or in new ways, like new ways of intuiting, new ways of understanding yourself or just what's going on in the ether, right? So, as that has been going on, you've been pulled into new territory. There's probably a great sense of novelty about what's going on with you and your awareness of that, your relationship with spiritual energies. So, as it turns retrograde, there's a consolidation around this. There's a further internalization of this for you, such that maybe you feel like you've been experimenting with, like, self-analysis or, again, intuition, these religious or spiritual practices, things like that. But this is about what feels right, what is really working for you, what feels like it's been really supportive of you, and owning that, crystallizing that, internalizing that. That is now a part of you. And that is a springboard from which you're able to further explore yourself as we forge forward again, starting next February when it's moving direct again. You're going to be getting into even more territory of who you are deep down, what's going on with you internally, and what kinds of energies are you connected to. What's also wonderful is that Uranus can really help us to break patterns. And a lot of our patterns that are outside of our conscious awareness, so some of those that can be a little bit more difficult to break, they tend to show up in the 12th. And so you may find that if you have been trying for a long time to break some patterns of behavior or thought, or again, conditioning from when you were young, that can be super deep down, and it can be even difficult to ascertain as to what that is or where it's coming from. And Uranus being in this area is going to help with that a lot, especially when it stations to go retrograde and direct. As it's stationing to go retrograde, it's likely to be bringing this more to your awareness. Whereas when it stations to go direct, it's more likely that you're going to be able to like actively find that you're breaking those patterns, that you're breaking out of that mold. So as I have here, any sort of old anxieties, old beliefs or habits, they can wind up unexpectedly surfacing, especially around the September 10th, plus minus a couple weeks at least as it's stationing. That could wind up bursting forth to your conscious awareness in order to help you to reevaluate it and then ultimately to eliminate it. And then as Uranus winds up turning direct again next year, to move on from it, to move on free and liberated from whatever these unwanted patterns may be, or to recognize even a lack. Maybe there is an idea that you want to have about yourself or the world, or maybe you haven't thought about the fact that, oh, the other people that I'm dealing with, they don't worry about this, or they have this sense of support that maybe I haven't been really working with. Maybe you've been kind of playing life on hard mode, and this could help you either again to break unwanted patterns or even to create new, very healthy, helpful patterns for you as well. But a lot of this is going to be in the subconscious mind, in the psyche. So it's going to be pretty intangible. It will, though, be very thoroughly helped by intentionally digging into psychology and your sense of spiritual connection. So spending more time in retreat, spending more time in study around that, maybe in solitude or meditation, is going to help immensely. And additionally, if you have felt like there is this kind of internal restlessness that has come out of nowhere, that could be Uranus having just moved into your 12th. And that is something that you can learn the ropes with more and more in the coming years. And this retrograde is going to help with that as well. Through recognizing where is that line for you, there's going to be a ton of new ideas that are floating around in different phases and different cycles over the coming years with Uranus and Gemini in your 12th that are percolating basically internally, maybe ideas about the world, or about, philosophy, about yourself, etc., about different connections, different intuitions or instincts that you're having about things. And at times it may become a little overwhelming. But as this is turning retrograde, as it's stationing, this should help a lot with finding where are those lines. Where do you need to say, okay, that's enough of like either digging into your own psyche. We don't always need to be working on shadow work, right? We can sometimes tune out from that, chill, live our own lives, do our own thing, give ourselves permission to rest up when we have time rather than always being internally or psychologically or emotionally productive and always working on ourselves. So I would also take this time to recognize where is that line for you and how can you be really deeply supportive of your well-being while you are in these various phases, working through all the different layers of who you are internally as well. But yeah, expect a lot of hidden information, insights, realizations to kind of come up to the surface here. Ultimately, like I said, Uranus is working on trying to liberate yourself from the distant past and from the recent past as it's working in retrograde here. It's going to be pointing things out. They may not always be the most comfortable, but it will be very helpful to reevaluate those things and then eliminate them as well. If you have put a lot of if you followed a lot of threads when it comes to spiritual practices or meditative practices or energy work or stuff like that as well, I wouldn't be shy to take this time to consolidate around one or two or five or whatever it is that really feel like they're paying off for you. And if you do want to reverse course on some of those, if you do want to pull back from some, if you don't feel like it's really doing you much good, I wouldn't be shy about that. And this would actually be some pretty great timing for that, to evaluate effectively what is giving you a great quote unquote return on investment. And then also to clearly decide whether you want to take a given perspective or a given practice with you forward. Additionally, you may find that you're getting more comfortable with the ground that you have forged. So kind of reaping some of the rewards of having forged into some internal uncharted territory, really digging stuff up from the psyche, benefiting from that at this point. And again, as you consolidate and internalize that, that's going to give you that really nice foundation from which to springboard into a greater and greater understanding of yourself year after year as this goes retrograde and direct, understanding yourself more and more and more. But yeah, I think that that is a lot of what I have for you, Cancer. So I did go into this as the kind of overarching Uranus in Gemini transit in a recent video. I will link to that in the description box under related video. I have covered a lot of the highlights here though, so it's not absolutely necessary, just if you want to dig into it further. And other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Leo, we have Uranus in Gemini turning retrograde in your 11th house. And this is the place primarily of the social groups that you belong to, the social identities that you carry. Especially beneficial connections show up here. So people who kind of lift you up often will see this as connections to communities that help you to network, or colleagues can show up here, people who are really supportive of you and your goals, but also your own hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and that which kind of fuels your ambition tends to show up here as well. Long-term goals can even wind up showing up in this area, that sense of like an aspiration that you're reaching for. Now, Uranus has been moving into and out of this area since about last year. So we've probably seen some sense of novelty, a little bit of a shakeup, a little bit of a sense of liberation in some ways, or unpredictability, potential disruptions and insights about who you're connecting with, and probably a lot of excitement about connecting with new kinds of people, maybe even pretty unconventional people or socially oriented, I'm shy to say ideological, but like social cause people. So communities that are focused on maybe improving something or finding solutions to something. That can be within a field, but it can also, of course, be to do with like community issues that you're trying to address, or even political issues. But now what it's doing is it is turning retrograde. And what's unique about this alignment so far is this is the first time that it's going to be going retrograde and staying in Gemini this time. And that is a very different kind of a transit to experience than we've had before. So before it was always kind of touching base with your 10th house. It was always focusing in on what is the ambition? What are we actually executing on? This is much more focused on, again, the social connections and identities and things along these lines, the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations, etc. So this is going to station to turn retrograde on the 10th of September of 2026. It's going to stay retrograde until about the 8th of February of 2027. And I'll allude to what's going to happen after that. But this is the general period of time where you're likely to feel that you're consolidating or re-envisioning, maybe reinventing, breaking some patterns in this area. But it's likely to feel strange because a lot of this is new anyway. but there's still this first major check-in point that we're experiencing here. So I wouldn't be shy to draw some judgments maybe about new groups that you've connected with or new identities. Does it feel right? Does it feel free? Does it feel like you are liberated? And being as radically honest with yourself about that is always going to be the way to go for years to come. It's Uranus is going to be in this area until about 2033. It'll go direct and retrograde several times in the coming years. But being really honest with yourself about your connections, about how you feel about the people around you is always going to serve you well in that. But now is about pulling back a little bit, looking at what's really helping you and what's not, what feels like it's genuinely going to be beneficial to your aspirations and even your ambitions, and what doesn't quite feel right. Maybe I'll give you a few examples here as we go. Maybe, for instance, you have gotten involved in some kind of a community group that is focused on addressing a community ill. Like maybe this is a nonprofit that you've been volunteering with, which is focused on housing or feeding people in your community. And maybe it's been really wonderful, but maybe you're starting to pick up on, oh, there's a lot of like drama maybe in the group, or maybe there's even some people pulling salaries that feel a little bit more than they should be based on how much help is really being offered to the community, things like that. And so, or maybe it's even just the cause itself feels somehow not satisfactory, or like, okay, I've done this. Now let's kind of move on to the next thing. So I wouldn't be shy about any sort of like feeling like you're being flaky or feeling any sort of an imposter syndrome about drawing some judgments here, and maybe pulling back a little bit. Maybe re-envisioning who is it that you want to be connecting with going forward. Just because a lot of these connections may be new doesn't mean that you can't draw some conclusions here. And that's one of the things that this retrograde, especially around the station point in September, is likely to be bringing up for you. So as I have here, some groups are probably going to stop feeling aligned with your future. Additionally, I will say, it doesn't just have to be the new ones. These could even be groups that you've been connected with for quite some time. But there's always the sense of like the transit getting jostled when there's a station direct or there's a station retrograde. And that can be just enough to bring something to our attention, to bring us some sense of new insights about, does this go forward with me or not? Because Uranus is always about what makes you feel liberated and what really fascinates you, and what's really going to be opening doors for you and bringing in opportunities. So some of these patterns that you're breaking here when it comes to connecting with people who you're connecting with, they may go back a little bit. Additionally, one thing that's quite fascinating about this alignment for you is that there may be a sense of either connecting with unconventional people or communities, and that's going to be regardless of whether this is retrograde or direct for sure. So I would say 2025 to 2033, that's going to be an ongoing thing. But when we get these retrogrades, often we can wind up reconnecting with something. So it may not just be like, oh, this is a new connection and maybe it's not feeling so aligned anymore, so I want to go looking for something new. It could even be some surprising connection from the past that's popping up. And it may be completely out of the blue. It may be something you haven't thought about, or someone or a group of people, or even, again, a social cause that you haven't thought about for a very long time. And maybe this is even like, quote unquote, a scene. So maybe you used to be really into a specific genre of music and you used to go to live shows all the time when it came to that. Maybe you even used to like jam with people or whatever it was. And maybe you've fallen out of that for a while. Maybe you felt like, oh, I grew out of that. Well, was it really necessary to grow out of it? And does it really light you up? This could have you reconnecting with some of those old roots even. So finally, coming back from the social stuff quite as much, this will still play in, but when it comes to your hopes, dreams, your aspirations, what you're optimistic about, what you're excited about, and your long-term goals, they tend to show up in the 11th house as well. And this is a bit of an internalization of the Uranus and Gemini energy as it goes retrograde. So it may feel like there are these strange internal insights that are coming up that may feel like a recalibration around your goals, around what you're aiming at, maybe around the lifestyle that you're aiming at. This could 100% even be like, okay, you've been following a certain path and you've been excited about it. But now that you're connecting with it more, maybe you even recognize I'm not the most thrilled with some of the people or the characters or the personalities that seem to show up with this. So maybe I want to just pivot a little bit. And again, this doesn't have to be a like total radical departure with the past. Sometimes Uranus is going to bring that up, but sometimes it's just going to be asking you around the question, around the edges, around the corners of this, like, are these really your own dreams? Or are there some social expectations that are attached to this? Do you feel like, well, it's not quite feeling right, but this is the path that I'm on, and these are the promises that I've made. So I'm just going to continue to forge forward. I think we've all been in that experience of kind of throwing good energy after bad and just following a path because we're on it. And then sometimes it can literally feel like we are getting further and further afield from what we're really wanting. So, again, that kind of radical honesty with yourself about what you're genuinely wanting is going to be important here. And probably a lot of what feels really authentic to you right now is probably going to be some themes of liberation or novelty or not feeling stuck in a rut or feeling like you are in a continual state of reawakening to new aspects of yourself or new insights or new opportunities and maybe even new places, new faces. And that may require not 100% identifying with any specific group of people, because that's when we start, I think, to get really kind of into a rut of other people's expectations of us. Being your own person is going to be really important here. And having that overlap with other people is really wonderful. But staying in charge of that and staying liberated in, I don't need for other people to approve of what I'm doing all the time, I think is a really healthy way to manage a Uranus in the 11th house kind of a transit. So again, this is this kind of consolidation, re-envisioning how you want to move forward starting next year. We're about to get a bunch of planets going retrograde. So I got to tell you, this winter is going to be a lot of looking back over things, slowing down with things, again, kind of consolidating in a lot of different areas. And then next spring and next summer is going to feel like, okay, now we're forging ahead again. So this is going to be a period of time of a lot of internal review. And what you should be focused on is like, when we get to next year, what is it that you want to be working on? And maybe look at that from a few different angles for now, reevaluate, maybe withdraw from certain things that you know isn't going to be working for you, pull that energy back a bit, even affirming what is going to go forward with you. So like reaping those connections that are really wonderful and reprioritizing those, doubling down on what's working for you socially, doubling down on those people that when you bring up an idea of yours, they are very supportive of that. Maybe they feel even very aligned with what it is that you're after. And so there's the sense of compatibility of aspiration together, people that you can really grow with. So pulling back and redoubling your energy, your efforts in that area, reaping those benefits of what you have sown up until this point, the uncharted territory that you've gotten into in the past year or so, so that when we do get to February and beyond, you feel more comfortable with this new ground that you're on. You feel like the foundation is pretty solid there, such that you are comfortable forging ahead even to ever more uncharted territory for yourself. But yeah, I think that that is a lot of what I have for you, Leo. If you want to dig into this a little bit more, I did cover like Uranus and Gemini overall in a recent video. That is going to be linked if you want to dig into this a little bit more and basically what it's going to be bringing up for you from 2025 all the way through 2033. But other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Virgo, we have Uranus in Gemini stationing to turn retrograde in your 10th house. This is a place of your public life, your ambitions, that which you're setting out to accomplish. This has a lot to do with your public image as well. And if you have a traditional career path, it often speaks directly to that, but it's also just kind of the titles that you hold and what you're known for. So it's going to station to turn retrograde on the 10th of September of 2026, and it's going to stay retrograde until the 8th of February of 2027, when it'll turn direct again in Gemini, and then it'll go further this time into Gemini. This is also part of a broader transit of Uranus through Gemini that's going to wind up developing over the course of several years. So it first entered this area in 2025. It did wind up retrograding back out of the sign. And this is the first time that we're getting it turning retrograde, where it's actually going to stay in Gemini the whole time and really focus its energy on your 10th house. But there will be these kinds of ebbs and flows in this area of your life now. And this is a period of time that you're starting to get into, September until February, where there's this kind of consolidation around a lot of the novelty, the sense of liberation, the sense of unpredictability, or potentially even some disruptions or insights or new approaches that you've been taking with regard to your ambitions. So what is it that you're going after? What is it that you're wanting to make of yourself? There may have been, since 2025, and I would kind of expect that this is going to be the case, some new ideas about what you're wanting and how you are doing that, and maybe even what you're capable of. So Uranus can really shake you up, especially if there's any sort of imposter syndrome or any sort of self-doubt. Uranus is about removing limitations completely, even if it requires shaking things up entirely. So I'll give you a little bit of an example of how it could do that in kind of a funky, weird way that would be very comfortable for Uranus, but may not be what we would usually feel the most comfortable with. But again, it's very much how Uranus works. Maybe there is an approach or an ambition that is introduced to you, but it requires separating yourself from something that's not compatible with that. So, for instance, this could be Uranus loves to go independent. Maybe this is an independent kind of a career path that would require you maybe to pull back from a career path that was focused on working for a specific company. It may feel a little scary. It may feel like totally uncharted territory. It may feel like, oh my gosh, there's going to be so many different levels and different hats that I'm going to have to wear, and that I'm going to have to really stay on my toes with things, and I'm going to have to multitask all the time if maybe you want to run your own company and be self-employed. And that requires really looking at you and what you're capable of very differently. It may even require studying up on some of those things, studying up on like how to manage taxes if you're self-employed or things like this, how to plan these things out, how to manage client loads and things like that, in addition to whatever it is that you would be producing or providing as a service or something like this. Outside of the sense of career path, this could even be, who is it that you're wanting to be? Maybe there's something that has felt far-fetched. Maybe this is, I want to be seen as very unique and very authentic, maybe in a spiritual sense. Maybe this is really embracing and wearing on your sleeve your spiritual ideals, and maybe even some new agey things, like maybe not being closeted about being into astrology or something like that, like we often are. If, for instance, it feels like our communities or other identities that we carry might not be completely compatible with that. But this is about being really authentic in your public identity, really, truly going after what you're wanting, embracing fully your true ambitions. And again, some of this is likely to have been stirred up in the past year or so. And it may be very novel, and it may be things that you thought were far-fetched or, far afield from what would be realistic for you. But Uranus is very much here to say, again, for several years, that what we think is realistic is really just us kind of being in a rut. It's us being too restrictive with ourselves. And it can wind up bursting open opportunities for us that seem completely out of the blue. So don't doubt what you're capable of with this. As it's turning retrograde though, if there are some ideas that have gotten stirred, if you have even taken some steps toward novel ambitions for you or a new kind of a career direction, maybe there's even been a shakeup in your career. This is now about looking at that differently, consolidating around that, internalizing that. Sometimes I feel like we can be on a path, but still kind of have one foot in, one foot out of, is this real? Is this something that's actually going to stay available to me? This would be the moment to really internalize the, yes, this is the new me. This is the new future that I am pursuing. And so from internalizing that, you can double down on re-envisioning that, reinventing. What is it that you're after here? This can go along with really affirming that you have broken a pattern, that you're not going to go back to it, or that you're not going to stay stuck in a rut, or that you're not going to tell yourself, oh, it's too hard at 50 or whatever to learn this instrument, so it's never going to become a part of my identity. It very well could, especially if something like that has been introduced to you in the past year or so as something you're wanting to pursue. There aren't limitations like that when Uranus is working with you in this way. Now, I will say as well, with that retrograde, sometimes it's literally things that you've thought about in the past, or that like a path that you were on for a time and that you may have abandoned. Now, it could be something that you have already kind of adopted. Now maybe you are recalibrating or pivoting around some new pursuit that you've brought up. But I also would not be surprised to see this show up as, this is something that I once loved that I backburnered because maybe it wasn't the most practical or whatever it was. And this would be about bringing that up again, actually pursuing that again. If it's something you really love, if it's something that makes you feel free, that makes you feel authentic, Uranus is really going to reward staying open to that, staying flexible with that, prioritizing that, making space for you and who you genuinely want to be, and not just what is expected of you, or not just following the well-worn, the beaten path. Uranus, without a doubt, is going to be bringing you down some unbeaten paths in the coming years. So the more that you can embrace that, the more that you can affirm to yourself, this is something that I'm capable of, and it is something that is genuinely open to me. That's going to be really wonderful. And that's also going to help you as it continues to go retrograde and direct to forge into that uncharted territory, and then to consolidate it and re-envision, how do I want to push this into the next stage? How do I want to push it into the next stage? So embracing that kind of ebb and flow of a rush of novelty and a rush of authenticity, and then recalibrating. What if that feels great? What if it do you want to drop? You're allowed to drop some of these new things as well. That's not flaky. That's just coming back to yourself. Now, another thing with this retrograde is it could have you reversing course fully in terms of either a path that you've been on for some time. Maybe there is something that you've been pursuing, but some of the authority structures within whatever it is that you are pursuing, let's say it is a traditional career path, maybe it feels restrictive. And right around this station point, you start to really feel that internally. You start to really feel that urge, that stirring of, man, if I don't find something around the edges to adjust about this, it's going to kind of burst onto the scene of me maybe making a very radical decision. So one thing I would actually kind of caution about here just a little bit is a knee-jerk, like quitting your job suddenly or something like that. Or if you are in college, like knee-jerk, I'm done with this, I'm going to go and do something else. Give these things time to percolate. This isn't necessarily a time where you need to take a bunch of action. When it's retrograde, you should be thinking about these things. You should be sizing them up, developing the idea internally before you really burst forth with it. And then also find those release valves. Find those little aspects around the edges where you're able to release some of the pressure if you do feel like there is an intolerable restriction that you're dealing with. Maybe this is actually taking your PTO, or maybe this is making sure that you're not just doing work and then going home and then work and then home and then errands or whatever. Maybe this is, again, kind of prioritizing something that you really enjoy and something that you're genuinely wanting to pursue. Additionally, Gemini can indicate that there are two things, and that may be something that is literally the case for you when it comes to different paths that you're following. They may be incompatible and they may stay kind of parallel paths that you are simultaneously forging forward on. And this could look like a traditional career path or a traditional kind of role that you're playing, like maybe it's being a parent or a grandparent or something like this, but not necessarily having that take up 100% of your time and effort and energy, but rather simultaneously developing either an independent career path or an independent version of yourself, maybe kind of outside of your family, a different way of approaching life that is completely different and maybe totally separate from your role as a parent or grandparent or something like this. Additionally, there may be some internal insights that come up, some realizations or aha moments that wind up coming up that can wind up redirecting your trajectory or really recalibrating you in a pretty deep way. And I would say, again, this isn't necessarily a moment to knee-jerk react to that, but definitely take note of it. Reap all of those insights. Reap all of the uncharted territory, the pushing yourself outside of comfort zones that you've already done over the past year. Allow for that to crystallize. Allow for that to be internalized as this is the new life that I'm leading. This is the new future that I'm pursuing. That way, when you start to forge ahead again next year, so after February, when this is moving direct again, and you start pushing more and more into uncharted territory, that you do feel like what you're pursuing is authentic and it is yours. And so that you can kind of sidestep any of the unnecessary imposter syndrome or fears about being flaky or fears about pursuing a new unbeaten path forward. So take note of how you've pushed yourself in the past year or some of the desires that have come up for you over the past year. And let that be the foundation for you as you are forging forward again, starting perhaps around February. This is also going to play into this winter. We're going to have a lot of retrograde planets kind of simultaneously. So likely we are going to feel like we're internalizing, like we're withdrawing, we're thinking some things through, we're going within before we wind up starting to take a whole new cycle, a whole new phase of action as we get into February, April, June of next year, and we start to really push forward with things again. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I have for you for now, Virgo. I did just cover in a video like the overarching Uranus and Gemini transit as a whole that we're going to be experiencing from 2025 to 2033. So if you do want to dig into this a little bit more, there's a little bit more of that in there. I have covered a lot of the highlight points though in this, so you definitely don't have to. But yeah, other than all of that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have Uranus in Gemini turning retrograde in your ninth house. So this is the place of your worldview. It's the place of the expansion of your horizons mentally in terms of knowledge, understanding, perspective, but also on a physical level, travel winds up showing up here, putting yourself in unfamiliar circumstances, unfamiliar territory. So exploring tends to show up here quite a bit as well. Your sense of spirituality and faith, as well as your sense of personal growth, personal development. So this is a really wonderful house to have Uranus moving through. As I mentioned, it's stationing to turn retrograde, and that's going to take place on the 10th of September of 2026. And then it's going to be moving in retrograde motion until the 8th of February of 2027. So that's primarily the phase of this transit that we're going to be discussing is this retrograde. It is taking place within the broader context of Uranus in Gemini, which is from about 2025 to 2033. And this is also the first time that we're getting Uranus turning retrograde in Gemini and then staying in this sign. So just staying in your ninth house here. When it did so last time, it had just edged into Gemini, and then it wound up moving back into Taurus. So this is definitely a very new perspective that we're getting here. Uranus itself has a lot to do with novelty and liberation, can be kind of unpredictable. It can be quite surprising. It can shake things up a lot. Has a lot to do as well with interest and like spark, excitement, fascination. It can be a bit disruptive at times, certainly, but it is really going to be working overall on breaking you free from any sort of restrictive perspectives or perceptions of yourself, of your place in the world, of how the world is. So any sort of limitations that you feel along those lines, that's ultimately what this Uranus in Gemini is going to be working on, so that you feel like you have more options and greater sense of possibility in the world. And you may have felt since 2025, since it moved into this area, like you have been working through that, like you have been expanding your horizons, expanding your worldview, your perspective, like you have had this novel sense of faith and curiosity. Maybe there have even been some new foreign connections that you've developed, or some interest in travel and exploring new territories for yourself. And that is all absolutely wonderful. As this turns retrograde, we will see something of a consolidation and internalization of all of this. So while it may have felt like, oh, I'm in this new territory, now it's becoming a little bit more you. It's becoming a little bit more, not just this is the new version of me, but this is me at this point. This is how I've developed up until this point. And so consolidating that more into your perspective. It may feel a little bit less with some of these new perspectives like you're experimenting with them, and more like you're comfortable with them. Now, additionally, with that retrograde, you may have branched out in a lot of different directions. Maybe you've been doing a lot of studying or reading, or just taking in different ideas, having a lot of conversations. Maybe there's even been some learning or like courses that you have been exploring. So this would be a great time to check in on, especially if you've been a little bit overwhelmed by all of the options and all of the different ideas that people have about the world, to see what feels right, what feels authentic, what actually excites you, what feels liberating to you, what feels like it's holding a lot of space for you to be yourself and to explore the world and to feel like this is your world to explore, and then consolidating around that. And even feeling somewhat free to reverse course on maybe some of the feelers that you've put out there. We don't always need to follow up entirely on all the different things that we're experimenting with. So what's been exciting? What has been lighting up your mind and your spirit? Double down on that. Internalize that. That is now a part of you. But you also don't need to bring forward with you any sort of old or even new restrictive perspectives and restrictive maybe paths or ideologies even. If you have been brought up in or have recently discovered some ideologies that seem somewhat judgmental or creating outsiders and otherizing, sometimes that can feel very affirming to us if it is affirming us, but it can also create these kind of guardrails that we feel like we then need to live within. So I wouldn't be shy to think that through with any sort of ideologies or systems of belief or doctrines that either you've been carrying for some time. This can jostle that and can give you some insights into that may be unique as it's stationing. But even some of the new ones that you've been toying around with, this, I'll give you a perfect example. This could be being really excited about a new philosophy or a new ideology that you have encountered and feeling like, oh, this is how I've felt about things for so long, and I'm finally seeing it in writing, right? Like I think a lot of us have had that experience at different points in life. This could be a moment in time where you're starting to discover some aspects of it that may not fit for you. So what I would say is, if that's the case, try not to make yourself fit within that. Allow for there to not be complete overlap. Maybe you don't need to reject that ideology or philosophy outright, but try not to tell yourself that you need to abide by it or that you need to live by the expectations of some kind of a doctrine or system of belief or something along these lines, or even a culture. This could also have you rethinking or re envisioning an educational path forward as well. If you have recently started teaching, or even if you've been teaching for a while, because of the internalization of this Uranus, it could be bringing some really wonderful insights about how to play with that, how to experiment with it, maybe different ways of trying to do that. Also, a greater sense of awareness or aha moments around any sort of hiccups or complications or aspects of that, again, feel like maybe they get a little bit stuck or maybe they're not that helpful. So if you are a teacher, I would be spending this time totally just like toying with ideas, thinking about different approaches to pedagogy, basically. Like, how do you teach? How do you get your ideas across? Are they seeming to be appreciated? Is there maybe a different way that you could go about that? If you have been losing interest maybe in a topic that you're studying, maybe there's a pivot that you're wanting to make around that as well. And this would certainly encourage something like that. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend making a knee-jerk decision about totally upending and pursuing a completely different like course of study. Not quite yet. What I would say is maybe wait until February, if that's at all possible. If you've been thinking about this for some time, don't let me tell you what to do. But if you are kind of percolating on something like that, there's not a rush with this. Like I said, it's a long-term transit, and often we're going to want to start forging into new territory or acting on things as it's direct, and that'll happen again in February. But right now it's about thinking things through, again, consolidating, re-envisioning, breaking patterns, etc. Additionally, retrogrades can also bring in things from the past that are surprising, especially with Uranus there. It may be really off the wall, or it may be completely out of left field. Maybe there is some perspective that you used to have about life, about the world, about yourself, about anything really, that maybe you feel has fallen by the wayside. You may not have even really realized it. Maybe it's a sense of optimism about the future. That would be about the most relatable thing in the world right now. I feel like a lot of people used to be a bit more hopeful about things, but I do think that it's going to be important for everyone, really, to have a sense of optimism and hope about the future and to preach that, to bring a lot of people back to that. So maybe that is even something that you've been trying to sort out. How do I get that spark back? How do I get that sense of optimism about the world back? And how do I feel less fearful or less in a sense of like fight or flight mode about the world? How can I lighten up that perspective? And I would definitely recommend like dwelling on that a bit. I think it could be incredibly fruitful, not just for you, but maybe even the ninth house having a lot to do with the dissemination of knowledge and ideas. You may even find that you are able to cheer other people up quite a bit as well. And I think that's, of course, something that the world very much needs right now. But it could even be an old course of study. Maybe it is a degree that you didn't finish. Maybe you are older now and you're able to pursue that course of study again. Maybe it's an interest that you had. Maybe it's a tradition that you used to follow. Maybe it's a meditation practice or any kind of a practice like that that you used to follow, but that you kind of fell out of. You may find that you're really able to explore that at this point and really find a sense of deep enrichment coming from that as well. Additionally, again, this is a place of personal growth and development. And with that Uranus turning retrograde, this could be almost self-study. Like you are digging in really deep into who you are, again, what you believe in genuinely, outside of any sort of parameters of doctrine or whatever. This is really about you authentically and what's going on within you, the perspective that you bring to the table as well, what's true for you, and really owning that, embracing that, not feeling the need to make excuses for that or to make that relatable to others or to make it, again, fit into any sort of a doctrine. So really being radically honest with yourself is going to be important for the years to come with Uranus and Gemini up in your ninth, but perhaps especially when it's retrograde and you're kind of coming back to yourself. I think it's going to be hard for you to overlook or to try to convince yourself of something that's not true. So, yeah, I would really lean into radical honesty with yourself. And you're very likely through that process to discover more and more deeper aspects of who you are and what you love and what you want to pursue. Opportunity, aspiration as well also shows up in that ninth house there in a really wonderful way. So, yeah, finally, other than that, you may even be able to travel back to some place that you didn't think that you would be able to before. Maybe like going back home, exploring even places that you've been before. So, yeah, I think that that's a lot of what I have for you for now, Libra, around this. I did recently do a whole video about the transit as a whole. So from like 2025 to 2033, Uranus in Gemini. If you want to dig into this a little bit more, that's going to be in the description box under the related video. But I have covered a lot of the highlights here, so it's definitely not entirely necessary. But other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have Uranus in Gemini stationing to turn retrograde in your eighth house. So, this is the place of your connections, your deep connections and ties with other people. This can be overt commitments in the sense of financial or material or dependency kinds of commitments that we have with other people. Can be also what would be referred to as like karmic ties or emotional, psychological ties to people as well. So, the intangibles as well. It can have a lot to do with your sense of trust and sharing with others, your sense of vulnerability, the expectations of yourself and others in your connections. It can also be a place of where finances seem to just kind of come in or go out. So, not necessarily money that's coming in from your work, unless you work with clients or insurance or things like that. But there can be settlements or inheritances that wind up coming through here. It can also point to some expenses, especially around dependencies, people who are dependent on you, or debts, taxes, things like that. So, as I mentioned, it's stationing to turn retrograde. That's going to be on the 10th of September of 2026, and it's going to be moving in retrograde motion until the 8th of February of 2027, at which point it will again turn direct, and then it's going to go more into Gemini next year. And this is also taking place within the broader context of the Uranus and Gemini transit that started in 2025 and it's continuing to 2033 in these ebbs and flows, these phases of direct and retrograde. This is our first retrograde that is going to start and end in Gemini, though. The last one actually took it out of that sign. So this is a pretty important checkpoint here. Uranus itself brings a sense of liberation or novelty, some unpredictability can wind up showing up, insights, aha moments, breakthroughs. And that's been occurring within this area of, again, your commitments, your entanglements with others. You may have been looking at some of your commitments differently. You may have been considering attachment versus detachment, freedom versus commitment in your relationships, be they business partnerships or romantic partnerships, family ties, and any sort of financial ties. So also any loans that you have, things like that. You may have been really wanting to free yourself or give yourself more freedom. Maybe you've even been thinking about freedom within committed connections as a concept, something maybe that you're also wanting to uphold for other people that you're connected to. So not wanting to feel overly attached to other people, such that maybe control things can wind up coming in, hopefully not like in extremes that can sometimes turn into like emotional manipulations or overlooking red flags. All of that stuff can wind up introducing itself into the eighth house. It doesn't have to be that though, but all of those kinds of securities and insecurities when it comes to other people. Sometimes in the eighth house, we can even value ourselves based on what we're able to offer to other people. So that in and of itself is an attachment to like an idea that we have about ourselves that isn't fundamentally rooted in ourselves and can get a little fraught as well. So you've probably been thinking about a lot of these things. And as this turns retrograde, what it's doing is, for one thing, as it's stationed, so right around September 10th, plus minus a couple weeks or so, likely there will be a little bit of jostling here. So it may feel like things are coming to the surface a bit more. It may feel like there's these reawakening moments or things that you can't overlook, breakthroughs coming up, especially around those station points. But ultimately, as it turns retrograde, it's going to be about consolidating a lot of these new ideas. So rather than feeling like, oh, these are ideas that I'm experimenting with, or, oh, maybe this is a new commitment that I am participating in, it could look like, okay, this is a new kind of connection that is how I do connection now. Or it is a new level of attachment / detachment that is a part of me now. This is how I approach these things now. Maybe it is a new attitude toward debt. Maybe you've gotten a real wild hair and you've decided, I need to pay off this kind of debt because I don't want to deal with that, weighing on me anymore. And this is now forging ahead, like free of that kind of debt. I would especially expect on the other side of this retrograde. So as you are kind of digging into all of this, it is about recognizing that a lot of what you have forged into, a lot of that novelty, is now a part of you. It's now a part of your way forward. This may require some old ties, or so let's say financial entanglements, or any kind of entanglements, really, I should have said here, may require some restructuring. This could be needing to have those conversations with people that you're connected to about, I can't weigh myself up based on this expectation that you have of me. I can't live just according to your own rules. If our rules work together, if they're compatible, great, but I can't be inauthentic to myself just to feel like I'm meeting your standards. Things like this are very likely to come up in all manner of entanglements or connections or dependencies that you have in your life as well. Now, this is also then probably going to wind up bringing up a lot about the psychological patterns and the attachment styles that wind up coming into this. Does control play a part in your connections? Probably. It does for the vast majority of people that haven't done a huge amount of digging into that already, right? So that's probably something that you are toying around with, that you are digging into. And this helps to break free. This helps to create a sense of liberation and breakthrough around any sort of maybe old attachments. Maybe you feel like, am I complete if I don't have this kind of connection to reinforce or reassure me, right? So this can help immensely with freeing yourself from that need, even. You may have some unexpected twists and turns when it comes to inheritances, settlements, any sort of agreements. And so what I would say is there may be news, like the station itself could wind up causing a settlement or an inheritance or something like this. So you may learn about something like that coming up for you. It may be a little bit weird, though. There may be delays, there may be complications, there may need to be a bit of back and forth about what something is actually going to look like. So I would wait to assume that you have the full picture on any sort of finances that are coming in, again, not through your own work. That usually shows up in the second house in terms of like income for work or like services rendered, basically. The eighth house is often referred to as like passive income or quote unquote other people's resources. And it'll often show up in these ways of like bonuses or inheritances, settlements, government benefits, insurance, things like that, or your partner's income. There could be some twists and turns, some shakeups there. So I would let this retrograde play out before there are too many assumptions that you're making about how something's going to wind up being experienced. So for instance, you may be told around this time, oh, there's an inheritance coming in for you. We're probably going to have that sorted out and to you by December. And you're like, awesome, that's before Christmas. There may be a delay or something like that with that retrograde. So I would not put all your eggs in that basket. Likely you're going to have more clarity around that come February when that Uranus winds up turning retrograde again. Additionally, one thing that could be interesting and very insightful around this time while it's retrograde is that the agreements that you make with other people may also go a little bit awry. Now, that may be a blessing in disguise because if you are depending on someone else holding up their end of an agreement and they drop the ball, this could kind of reinforce some notions that you have about wanting to be less and less dependent on other people holding up their end or your expectations of other people, or at the very least being able to detach your emotions or your situation, your standing from what other people are doing. So I know that that could be very annoying to hear that maybe someone will wind up dropping the ball. It would not surprise me, but there may be a real blessing in that it lights a fire under you to not be dependent on other people holding up their end of things and being able to manage kind of regardless, if that makes sense. But yeah, again, when it comes to all of this, I would just say a lot of this is going to be reaping some sense of rewards for pushing yourself outside of a comfort zone, liberating yourself, trying to break free from some dependencies, trying to be really radically honest with yourself and others about commitments, about what you're comfortable with, about what your expectations are, about what expectations you're comfortable with working under as well. This can also be very helpful in terms of insights about any sort of commitments that have broken down since it's moved into that house. So like since 2025 or something. Again, if there's been someone who's dropped the ball, that's kind of a thing with Uranus that can happen. But what it can wind up doing is it can help to offer a sense of greater independence, but also now understanding a little bit more about how other people tick and what's going on with others. It can help you to intuit what's going on with others. It can help you to see red flags, to be aware of what those look like. It can wind up inspiring you, for instance, literally to study psychology or to do research into behavioral patterns of people. That can be a huge blessing for you going forward. So those little bumps in the road when it comes to any sort of attachments that you have, sharing, trust, likely you're going to get a lot of benefit out of it, even if it may be a little bit annoying in the beginning. But yeah, like I said, this is about consolidating around the lessons that you've experienced here so far so that you are better able to forge ahead into more unfamiliar territory, a greater sense of independence next year as well as Uranus starts to move forward again. But yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have for you. As I mentioned, this is part of a broader Uranus and Gemini transit that's going to be going on for several years. I did do a video on that in and of itself. If you want to dig into that a little bit more, I have hit a lot of the highlights here, so it's definitely not totally necessary, but it will be in the description box under related videos if you want to dig a little bit more into it. And other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have Uranus stationing to turn retrograde on the 10th of September of 2026. And it's going to stay retrograde until about the 8th of February of 2027. So that's primarily the phase of this overall transit that we're going to be discussing here. But I'll definitely put it into its context. That is taking place in your seventh house. And that has everything to do with your relationships, your partnerships, your commitments to other people, your manner, the way that you connect with other people, what you're wanting from your connections to others, your expectations and theirs, how other people are showing up in your life. So kind of across the board, it's pretty straightforward in that sense of it's the other side of connections for you. Now, as I mentioned, there is a broader context within which this retrograde is taking place, which is that Uranus has, over the past year, been trying to push into Gemini. When it went retrograde last time, it actually went back into Taurus. So, this is definitely a new phase that we're dealing with where it's going to turn retrograde, but it's going to stay in Gemini this time. So, that's all that it's dealing with is your connections to other people, your relationships. So, you probably have noticed over the past year or so that there have been some changes, some maybe unpredictability, a sense of novelty, different kinds of people that you're connecting with. Maybe even some fascinating insights when it comes to how you relate to other people, new expectations, maybe feeling liberated from needing to people please as much or feeling like you're able to draw some new lines between you and others that give you a sense of being able to be yourself and express yourself a little bit more openly. You may have even been connecting more directly with some unconventional kinds of people. So maybe this is artists or people who have very strong opinions or people who just approach life in a different kind of a way or have a different kind of a lifestyle than is the norm. And maybe they've been helping to shake things up for you. So they may have even been introducing some new perspectives that you have about yourself. But now, starting in September of this year, we have this shifting retrograde, which brings a sense of consolidation around a lot of these new connections or these new ways of approaching other people. There's an internalization or a kind of reawakening that winds up happening as that Uranus turns retrograde. So, with all of this novelty, with all of these shakeups, with the unpredictability, with the new kinds of people, what of that is working for you and what of it is not? I think that sometimes when we are new to something, when there is a shift or a change, we can feel like we're somehow obligated to give it time to play out. We may feel like we're not quite expert in this new way of relating to people. And we may feel like we really want to give it time. We want to make sure that we really put as much effort into trying something as we can. What I would say about this is, for one thing, patterns of about 6 months of trying something out, seeing how it works, and then going back to the drawing board and checking in on that, recalibrating when it comes to your relationships with other people. That's probably going to be a great pattern to get into, is like continually checking in about every 6 months or so. But I also would not be shy around this time, especially if you worry a bit about flaking out on things, or if you do get that sense of imposter syndrome sometimes. Or again, maybe there are some deeply ingrained patterns of people pleasing or working to other people's expectations that are going to take a few different phases of Uranus forging forward, turning retrograde, forging forward, and jostling and shaking that up so that you're able to really liberate yourself from those kinds of patterns. But this is a really wonderful point in that, to approach this as a major checkpoint, especially when it comes to any new relationships, but even the existing ones. Do you feel liberated in them? Do you feel appreciated in them? Do you feel like you're able to do things that isn't specifically geared toward the people in your life and have them approve of it, and have them and also to not really need their approval, but to get that kind of wiggle room and freedom in your connections that even you as a Sagittarius kind of need all the time. This is a great check-in point to make sure that that is something that you're receiving in those connections. Additionally, this isn't just a one-way street. Are you holding a lot of space for the people in your life to do their own things, to go their own way here and there? Maybe someone even goes off on a different path and you disconnect for a little while. Are you comfortable with letting them meet you some point in the future if you guys wind up growing back together again? So, where are there any restrictions in your relationship patterns? Making sure you feel liberated, making sure other people feel liberated and appreciated. Now, this may look like needing to reconsider some commitments that you have. This will be a bit of a testing moment. It doesn't necessarily have to be like starting from scratch when it comes to all of your connections or relationships or anything like that, but some may fall away if they are too restrictive, if you feel like, I'm always walking on eggshells around this person. I feel like I can't really be myself around this person. This is a great time to give yourself the permission to pull back from that kind of a thing. Because if you don't, typically Uranus is going to wind up disrupting that connection anyway and trying to pull it away because it is actively liberating you within these connections. But working with it is always very wonderful, especially when it comes to insights and things like that, so that you're able to understand the meaning behind or the why behind who stays in your life and who doesn't, who's important to you and who are you deprioritizing. Now, another thing with pretty much any kind of a retrograde, sometimes things from the past wind up showing up. Now, with Uranus turning retrograde, we would expect for that to be a bit more surprising or a bit more out of the blue. So there could be someone that you used to be connected with that suddenly winds up reappearing. Maybe this is someone moving back and their path realigning with yours. So this could be past partners of any sort. And I don't look at the seventh house as just romantic relationships, business partnerships, but also close friendships, people who kind of feel like your other half. Even if you have like a close relationship with a sibling, sometimes I feel like the sibling can even show up in the seventh house, in addition to other places in the chart. But someone may reappear in your life, and that could be really exciting. So I would recommend kind of pulling back some of those layers, connect, see what's going on there, because that would be a very literal embodiment of this transit for you, is someone showing up unexpectedly from the past to give you a greater sense of freedom in your own life as well. Maybe injecting a little bit of novelty back into your life. Maybe there's even this kind of excitement or the spark of nostalgia that winds up coming in here. Maybe some old ways of connecting with people. Maybe you felt like you weren't as worried about what other people thought previously when you were younger. And yes, sometimes we do need to kind of mature out of the effort, I'm going to just do my own thing kind of attitude. But sometimes we wind up overcorrecting. And maybe this could kind of pull you back from maybe dressing or presenting yourself or being into certain things that you feel like you have to in order to maintain some social connections. Ultimately, this is going to be affirming the heck out of any connections that do really allow authenticity and freedom. So I would really recommend consolidating around those, prioritizing those more. Even if someone's a little off the wall, unconventional, they can present a lot of wonderful opportunities for you in the coming years. And they can also help you to feel like you're able to connect with a more authentic version of yourself or a more authentic way of relating with other people as well. So again, if you have had a lot of shakeups in your connections recently, this is about reaping that, but it's also about internalizing that, crystallizing that, and allowing for this to be a period of time where you're kind of shoring that up so that you feel like you're working with a recalibrated foundation of how you approach your connections with people, such that you feel more comfortable even pushing the envelope further, pushing yourself further into uncharted territory of authentic connections with people when after February, this Uranus winds up turning direct again, and it starts to push more and more into Gemini next year and in the years to come. But yeah, I think that that is a lot of what I want to address around this for you right now. I did do a whole video about Uranus and Gemini. I have covered a lot of what I needed to from that here, but if you do want to dig into it a little bit more, I will link to that as a related video. And other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have Uranus in Gemini stationing to turn retrograde in your sixth house. So, this is the place of your routines, your daily life, the tasks that you have, the things that you have to do, maybe a little bit more so than wanting to do them. This is the place of productivity, of responsibility. It's also a place of your well being or lack thereof. So, sometimes that's something that's very important as well to pay attention to. how much your routine is supporting or undermining your well-being. So we'll talk about that a bit as well. Now, this retrograde, it's going to start. So this is stationing, it's stopping in the sky, and it's turning retrograde on the 10th of September of 2026. And it's going to stay retrograde until the 8th of February of 2027, when it's going to stop again. And then it's going to forge forward and it's going to move more into Gemini than it has up until this point. So this is part of a broader transit of Uranus through your sixth house that started in 2025. It wound up retrograding out of the sign. This is our first retrograde with Uranus in Gemini that's going to stay in Gemini. And this whole broader transit of Uranus going through this area is also going to play out all the way into 2033. So this is a very important outer planet transit to this area. And it tends to bring a lot of novelty. It tends to really prioritize liberation, a sense of freedom, being able to kind of do your own thing, go your own way. It can be quite unpredictable and even a little bit destabilizing at times. So it can wind up introducing shifts and changes that we're not quite expecting and that we're needing to stay on our toes about. But right now, what it's doing is, again, it's turning retrograde. So it's consolidating. So there may have been a lot of novelty, a lot of focus on liberating yourself from routines and work and stuff like that, that either wasn't efficient or it wasn't giving you a strong return on investment, or maybe these are just things that you really didn't like doing. This could be a bit of shakiness within your working environment where maybe a company that you're working for is going through a lot of changes and that's also keeping you on your toes. So I would have expected a lot of shifts in this area of your life. This is about consolidating around that. So internalizing that. This could be, for instance, again, if you're working for a company that's going through maybe some restructuring or reorientations and things like that. Maybe you've needed to learn a lot of new software or new workflows, new coworkers, whatever it is. This would be a period of time where during the retrograde, it may feel like some of those shakeups are slowing down a bit, but that you're internalizing that novelty, those new things, those new workflows, those new employees or coworkers, those new systems of how you're doing things. And then utilizing that internalization or the crystallization of this new way of going about things, then being able to recalibrate next year as you're pushing forward, forging into, again, more new uncharted territory. So with that consolidation, some of this may look like reversing course. Maybe these are some changes that you have made and you've decided, I need to make things more efficient. I'm going to try all these different things to see what works and what's going to help. This would be the period of time where there's a checkpoint. Is it working? Is it not? Discarding or setting aside maybe even some new ways of approaching things that just aren't working for you. Maybe going a little bit back to some of the older ways of doing things and just kind of weaving that together based on what's productive, what's efficient, and what's not. What feels comfortable, what's working for you, and what's not. So I wouldn't feel flaky if you want to drop some of the new things that you've been doing and go back to some of the older ways. Maybe, for instance, this would even look like exercise routines can show up here, like well-being routines. So maybe this is some new diet even that you started on at some point over the past year or so. And this can be a great time to check in. Do you want to stick with that? Do you want to be more flexible with that? Do you want to discard it entirely? Do you maybe need more freedom within your diet? And again, this can be to do with any sort of productivity systems, anything to do with your health, really, as well. This could even look like a really strong desire to be more independent in your work, to not be micromanaged. That's one thing. If you've been kind of okay with being micromanaged in years or decades past, I would not be surprised if that becomes less and less tolerable to you. So I would see if you can account for that, basically try and make room for that. If that's not going to work with where you're at, so let's say that you are dealing with a pretty overbearing boss and it's becoming more and more claustrophobic, try not to just assume that that's going to be okay for you going forward, especially if it feels like it's starting to impact your health. One of the worst case scenarios, I hate to say, with Uranus that can sometimes come through is if we try and sweep things under the rug, especially those urges, that internal frustration of feeling like there's almost this kind of seismic energy that's building up that we feel the need to liberate from. But if we try to avoid letting that come through, often it will take away what's causing that. So that could literally look like a job that you hate suddenly falling away from you, So I would, if you are in a job like that, or if there's a routine that is intolerable, try to find that flexibility. Put your feelers out there, see if there's something better for you, or maybe make clear that you don't want to be micromanaged as much. Maybe actually take that PTO. Maybe actually put your phone on do not disturb when you're not in the office, etc. Maybe close your office door, if that's something where you've had a little bit of struggle with drawing boundaries around, no, this is the time where I just need to feel free to focus on what I'm going to focus on, and I can't have all of these outside disruptions. So hopefully some of this is along the lines of what you've already been working with over the past year or so. But this is, again, it's a check-in point to make sure that you're on some pretty solid ground here. Internalizing the developments, the progress that you have made here, feeling free to reverse course on anything that you have started to do, or even old habits that you've had that aren't working for you anymore, pulling back from those. Also, if there have been any ideas that have been stirring around some unconventional ways that you've wanted to work, this could be you actually developing them for yourself. Now, you may not be acting on it quite yet. That may actually start up around February when this Uranus starts to go direct again. But I wouldn't be shy. If you feel like you have some solutions to make your day-to-day life work for you more and give you more flexibility and freedom, I would be taking that super seriously. And again, maybe that looks like developing your own practice or going more independent when it comes to your work. You do have Gemini in your 6th house, so you can follow different threads when it comes to your working life simultaneously. And sometimes these factors of our life or these talents that we have, they get stirred up and activated when we get an outer planet transit. So this may be something that is a latent ability of yours to follow multiple paths. And now with Uranus moving in there, you could potentially see that working out. And this, as Uranus is going retrograde here, may be a period of time where it's really time to think that through and start to plan that out so that you can push in that direction in February. Additionally, if there are responsibilities that are not yours, that maybe you have taken on recently, especially, you may need to draw some lines, some boundaries around that. This could be just people that you know that are dependent on you. What is the return on the investment of your energy? Is it worth it? Sometimes we need to break patterns, and maybe one of those patterns is trying to be too much to too many different people, such that it winds up impacting your ability to serve yourself or your well-being. So yeah, overall, this is a period of time where you're really going to be reaping a lot of the benefits of maybe some unconventional methods or novel approaches or a liberation that you have kind of created for yourself, some new paths maybe that you've been pursuing when it comes to your routine, your daily life, reaping the benefits of that, checking in on what's not paying off, maybe cutting some ties there, breaking some patterns, even if they're new, that's totally fine. It's not being flaky. That is a part of being responsible, is knowing, is it working, is it not, and being willing to pivot. And a lot of what you're reaping right now, again, it's about consolidating, internalizing such that your sense of your structure of how you are approaching all the things that you need to get done and are responsible for, including your own well-being, has taken account for all of the novelty that's been introduced, that you understand how that's fitting in and working for you, such that you are able to introduce after February, when this goes direct again, more new approaches, greater efficiency, greater clarification, maybe again, something of a new path when it comes to your working life. And ultimately what this is about is feeling more liberated in your day-to-day life and creating a daily routine that supports your sense of well-being and satisfaction. So, of course, this is taking place within the context of the broader Uranus in Gemini transit that's going on from around 2025 to 2033. I did cover that recently in its own video. It's kind of even a broader overview than this is, if you want to dig into this a bit more. That said, I have hit a lot of the highlights here, so it's definitely not necessary. And other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have Uranus in Gemini stationing to turn retrograde in your fifth house. So, this is the place of your pleasures, your joy, what lights you up, what you love, who you love, the aspects of life that make it worth living. So, it's an absolutely wonderful house. Creativity comes through here, self expression, your children show up here, hobbies, interests, so many of the wonderful aspects of life show up in the fifth house. And there's been a lot there to work with for you. So, this retrograde, we will get that Uranus stationing to turn retrograde on the 10th of September, 2026. It's going to be moving in retrograde motion until the 8th of February of 2027. And then it'll finally turn direct again and forge even further into Gemini than it has up until this point. But this is part of the broader Uranus in Gemini transit that we're experiencing from 2025 all the way to 2033. So you probably have already experienced some shakeups along all of those lines, some novelty, some sense of liberation, and a greater sense of authenticity and getting in touch with yourself and being able to embrace everything that you love and embrace a sense of authentic self-expression and worrying a bit less about what other people think or what they expect of you or fitting in, but rather just truly embracing what lights you up in and of itself, regardless of what's going on with others, and allowing for people to meet you where you're at with that. So that has probably been unfolding in phases since 2025. This is a pretty special point. So of course, this is one of the station points. These are always going to be great moments to check in on the development of this area of your life. But this is our first station for Uranus to go retrograde where it's not going to leave the sign. Just going to stay within your fifth house. It's just going to bring that up. And what it'll do is it's going to consolidate and internalize a lot of what you've been experimenting with recently. So this is really wonderful for creating a new springboard from which to work next year as it starts to move forward again. So what are some of these new versions of yourself? What are some of these really authentic ways of going about creativity and self-expression and your sense of pleasure in life, throwing off the yoke of the expectations of others, etc. Reaping the benefits of that, checking in on that, naming that, appreciating it, acknowledging it for sure, but also looking at, are there any things that you've been experimenting with that aren't quite as exciting, that may not be offering as much return on investment? Maybe you even feel like you're trying a little too hard in certain areas, or maybe there's something that you wish was you, but isn't really, it doesn't quite feel right. But maybe for some reason or another, you feel like, oh, either wouldn't it be nice if this was authentic for me, or wouldn't it be nice if I could meet these people halfway or whatnot? But this is really about being radically honest with yourself about what internally feels good to you, and then feeling free to consolidate around that. So crystallizing that, no longer feeling like I'm experimenting with this, but rather changing your perspective on that such that this is now a part of me, and this is the area, this is the place from which I am growing and functioning going forward. So the kind of reinvention or the re-envisioning of yourself that's going on right now, it is about crystallizing, internalizing all of that. Maybe there are some new hobbies or creative passions or projects that you've been working on. This is about redoubling those efforts, but also making it a bit more efficient by potentially reversing course or letting go of any threads that just don't feel right going forward. So what do you want to take with you? What do you not feel like is worth taking with you? That's ultimately what that winds up boiling down to. Any patterns that you have around social expectation, as I've kind of alluded to and spoken to, and what you ought to do, these are going to come up again and again. As many layers as need to come off of that, those are going to be coming up. And especially around the station points here, they tend to jostle things, they tend to peel things back. So I would not be surprised if there are some really wonderful insights, maybe even a little uncomfortable, but wonderful nonetheless, insights or aha moments about people pleasing qualities or about how you hold yourself back from being truly authentic, maybe out of a fear of rejection or not being understood. This isn't about being understood. This is just about doing your own thing, going your own way, and letting those that are going to meet you on that path and grow with you on that path and do so. And if they won't, then Uranus is probably going to take some issue with overly accommodating or catering to people that aren't growing with you anyway. This can also have you coming back to the question of what role in your life does love play? Who are your genuine loved ones, and who do you have in your life because it is convenient or beneficial to you? It's not about cutting those ties. Those are great, but those are 11th house ties. This is about 5th house ties. So redoubling your efforts and really embracing the connections that you have around you just for the love of it, just because you enjoy them, just because they are super supportive of your spirit and vice versa. Maybe there are people around you that inspire you, and that's also really wonderful. Taking note of that and making sure that you are making the time and space for that in your life. So not allowing for creative pursuits or loved ones to fall by the wayside out of a sense of productivity or responsibility or things like that. You may even want to intentionally take note of not just your authentic self, but what's really original about you. What is really unique about you? What makes you different and maybe even a bit weird? And if you can take note of that and then really try and lean into loving and kind of adoring those aspects of yourself and really giving them a sense of appreciation, that's going to be a really healthy way to work with this Uranus as it is shaking you up, as it is introducing you to more and more of those aspects of yourself and encouraging you to really embrace them. This is also likely to bring to mind and to your attention the need for playfulness, for the joy of life, for those aspects of life that make life worth living. So, like I said, consolidating around that, internalizing that, making sure that that is a priority, feeling liberated to pursue that. There may be some different, unique things that wind up getting introduced to your life. Maybe these are things that you alone are going to be pursuing, maybe some interests of yours that are very niche and that you just won't know anyone else that's into that. But that's a very Uranus retrograde kind of a thing. So you may be discovering those kinds of interests or hobbies over the coming couple of months as well. But yeah, again, this is really just about reaping all of the rewards for the experimentation that you've been doing over the past year or so, leaning into a sense of gratitude and possibility and hope, joy, love, opening yourself up to life. And again, reaping the rewards of that and then owning it, consolidating around that, crystallizing it. This is a part of you now. It's not something you're playing with. That way, when we get this Uranus going direct again next year, you're able to pull in more and more and more of what you love and maybe follow new kinds of paths and new exciting threads around interests or love or joy or pleasure in your life. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius. It is quite a lovely transit. I also did just cover the overarching Uranus and Gemini, like 2025 to 2033 transit in its own video. If you want to go a little bit deeper into this, I will link that in the description. I have covered a lot of the highlights here, so you definitely don't have to. But other than all of that, I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Pisces, we have Uranus turning retrograde in Gemini in your fourth house. So this is the place of your home, your family, your roots, your sense of your true self deep down. This has to do with your past, your lineage, your sense of emotional security and comfort, your private life as well. And so Uranus is stationing, as I mentioned, it's going to turn retrograde on the 10th of September of 2026, and it's going to stay in retrograde motion until the 8th of February of 2027, at which point it will turn direct again, and it's going to move even more into Gemini next year. And this is part of a broader transit of Uranus in Gemini that started in 2025, and it's going to continue until about 2033 in these various phases of going direct and retrograde. This is our first time of Uranus turning retrograde in Gemini and staying in Gemini, though. So this is going to be a pretty important phase that you're getting to know the ropes of this transit and consolidating around it. So, Uranus itself has a lot to do with liberation, with novelty, with unpredictability, with trying new things, with experimentation, with excitement. There's often really strong insights and breakthroughs that we can experience with Uranus as well. It also has a tendency to push through any sort of limitations or restrictions that we or others may place upon any given situation or ourselves. So this is what has been kind of stirring things up in your fourth house around your home, your family, your roots, etc., in this past year or so. So I would expect that some of what I have just said sounds somewhat familiar to you, and that's what we're really going to be working with here. So as it stations to go retrograde, again, this is consolidating around that. It is internalizing a lot of the changes that you've made. Now, you may have been trying to dig into, trying to understand maybe your family, your lineage, your roots, your sense of emotional security. You may have been digging into that a bit. There may have been some shakeups within your family, some changes, some unexpected twists and turns, maybe some role reversals and things like that have been getting stirred up recently that have been causing you to think about this more. Maybe there have been some breakthroughs that you've recognized about the role that you play within family, it either being too restrictive or not well enough appreciated, or that there needs to be more flexibility within that, either for you or for the proper and good functioning of your family itself. So on the one hand, this could be on a psychological level of recognizing the roles that you played as a child and how those wind up impacting your sense of yourself, your sense of your future, your sense of your relationships, etc. And needing, like it could have been stirring up in you of, I need to be able to be myself. I cannot just live within this role. And it's too restrictive to me to be that person trying to expand my life, trying to grow as a person, etc. So that could have been a major aspect of this. But like I said, there may also be necessary role reversals. Like this could be some parents that are retiring and maybe you are needing to step in and kind of take care of them. Or it could be children that are growing up and moving out and no longer being in that role of direct parenting, day to day, kind of stepping in and maybe controlling, what they're doing or whatnot, but kind of needing to trust them on the one hand. And so your relationship with them shifting, changing in that way, but also maybe you feeling somewhat liberated to do your own thing because you're not constantly in that parental role, like day in, day out as part of your direct life. Maybe if they've moved off to college or something like that, that could potentially free up a lot of time for you to do your own thing, to explore your own interests, etc., to maybe even get a little bit more in touch with your true self beyond that role of being a parent. So this is going to, like I said, kind of internalize a lot of that. If there has been a lot of novelty along these lines, you may be crystallizing this. You may be feeling like rather than this is an experimental new thing that you are experiencing, but rather this is the new way that I am. This is the foundation now from which I'm working. It's changed. And so the future trajectory, the springboard that I'm working with here has changed. And therefore, next year even opens further opportunity to pivot, to recalibrate, to change course, especially when it comes to your private life. But so much can wind up coming out of that as well. Like this could wind up impacting your approach to relationships or to your personal goals and things like that, or even your public goals. So yeah, there may need to be a lot of changes. There may need to be some revisioning around some of these obligations or duties that you have within family. Some family members may even be stepping in for you. You may feel like you are gaining a sense of liberation and freedom due to the support of those around you. And that may look like financial assistance. It could look like material support, could look like moral support or encouragement, but it could also be that this feels like a safer place in which to experiment, right? So to push forward, to forge forward into uncharted territory of getting to know your true self and letting that out, and then consolidating around it. And the thing is, too, you may have put a lot of threads out there to play with of like, who am I deep down? Maybe this is spiritual traditions. Maybe it is just different interests or hobbies, or maybe even psychological or emotional approaches. Maybe it's talking to different guides, or teachers or people like that. Maybe it is listening to people who really seem to inspire you and speak to you as well. But at this point, by being able to really consolidate and internalize around that, anything that doesn't really feel authentic, that doesn't really feel like it's something you have to take forward with you, this would be a great time to reverse course on some of that. Let some of those threads go. Maybe let some of those teachers go, some of those inputs go that don't quite resonate as much as the others, so that you are able to more effectively consolidate a stronger sense of self that you're going to be working with going into next year. And don't feel like that even needs to be the final kind of true version of yourself. That is also then going to be a springboard to growth. You're constantly going to be innovating and reinventing yourself. And these points at which this Uranus stations to go retrograde, it's about whittle that down to what's truly real, reinforce that, own that, and then let that be the springboard from which you are working with as it starts to move direct again. So in this case, in February of 2027. You may also find that there's a little bit of jostling around any sort of questions of your living situation, where you're living, home renovations, who's living with you, etc. Property, literal property stuff. So it doesn't necessarily have to be where you're living, but maybe if you own other properties, or if you are renting and you want to buy, etc. You should expect, if there's some movement along those lines, which would not surprise me, either some insights about what you're truly wanting. And additionally, I would recommend utilizing this period of time if you're not 100% clear about what kind of living situation would work for you. Dig into it, study it, play with it. If you think that something is out of reach, Uranus in Gemini in your fourth house is very likely to prove to you that it's not. So also try not to arbitrarily limit yourself in terms of your options of what you would really love to have around you as a private kind of sanctuary in which to live. If there is something unique or strange about that, maybe you own a place, but actually you would prefer to rent and maybe move periodically. Maybe you're even wanting to go nomadic or something like this. This could really internalize and crystallize a lot of those ideas such that you're able to act upon them more as we have that Uranus again moving direct more next year. And that kind of plays into this other little note that I have of like these unconventional notions of security could wind up arising. So some people may feel like, I feel super secure when I own my own property and I have my family all around me and I have my 9 to 5 that I go to, and then I go and watch my kid play softball or whatever it is. But for you, that may not feel secure. Maybe your family doesn't feel the safest for you. And if that's the case, being really radically honest with yourself about that is going to do you really well with Uranus here, because Uranus isn't going to settle for you sweeping under the rug any genuine aspects, any like authentic notions of what feels right for you, sweeping that under the rug. It's going to constantly bring it out, and it may even get a little bit rough with how it's jostling things. It may force an issue if you try and sweep it under the rug. So if there are any unconventional things that have stirred up in you, different ideas you have about who you want to be around, who you feel comfortable with, who feels like family, not just who shares your surname and your parents, or whatever that is. Being honest with yourself about that is going to be really important here. And this is going to be a period of time where that Uranus is speaking really directly to you, to your heart, to your sense of security. And it's going to be pretty loud. It's probably going to be very difficult for you to ignore that voice that's coming through. So if something is a little off the wall, if something is unusual, if you are going off the beaten path, all the more evidence to me that you're kind of doing the right thing with this, because it's likely going to be drawing you down some of those paths. And Uranus tends to bring a lot of reward with our own willingness to be flexible with ourselves and with circumstances as well. So yeah, I would try and stay really open. I would very intentionally do not limit or restrict your sense of your true self as it seems to percolate up to you. Try not to shut it down. It's likely to come up more roughly or more erratically if you do try and stifle that. If family feels restrictive, if family is part of the reason why you stifle that, that's probably going to be top line in terms of what I would say. You should prioritize trying to figure out how to create more freedom for yourself within that. But just as much, family may be very supportive of you doing your own thing here. So I would look to them if you feel like you are able to communicate with family or with your private life about any sort of new notions of self or new ideas that you have about what would make you feel comfortable and secure. I would look to them for support if that seems at all like something that would be available there. But yeah, I think that is a lot really of what I have for you, Pisces. So of course, as I mentioned, this is part of the broader Uranus and Gemini transit. I did just do a full video on that in and of itself. It probably has a little bit more details to it than this one does, but I think I've hit a lot of the highlights here. So not entirely necessary, but if you do want to dig into that, it'll be in the description box under related videos. And other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.